Before we get started, you may notice this is a very unconventional video. You see, I actually sat down and recorded a Q&A with the creator of Black Powder Red Earth, John Chang. He's a really cool dude, tons of stories. Anyway, here's the segment where I actually sit down and ask him questions. So obviously the lead-in, because here's actually the first question, because I guess it's by a guy who had no idea what was going on when I pinged them. It's like, all right, so first question, who is the creator of Black Powder Red Earth?
This is like going to be the easiest question. I'm going to make it like a total fucking hatch. Okay. I'm John Chang. I'm the creator of Black Powder Red Earth. I created the series originally as a science fiction, basically private military contractor war on Mars story back in 2003. We changed it over to a modern conflict role in 2009 after a deal with Atari had gone sideways and we needed to start over with the IP.
Okay. Next one. What inspired you to make the comic, and have you ever worked in the military?
I have never worked in the military, but I have worked with Special Operations Forces for almost 20 years now. What inspired me to make the comic was working with the guys, and there was nobody telling any kind of stories about what from my perspective was actually going on in the war globally. And I wanted to make something that would pull the curtain back a little bit and talk about the way conflict was emerging and changing, because as somebody who understood war to be things like nation state versus nation state, even in a case like Vietnam where you have like an insurgency happening with, it was ultimately a nation state, North Vietnam fighting the United States. And that is very much not how the GWOT went down.
Okay. Next one, obviously, because we rambled, it's gonna be a little bit funny, but next one is, do you read manga?
Yes, I read manga almost exclusively in terms of comics at this point.
Okay, good to know. Let me see here, and I'm going to include this one because it is a continuation of the do you read manga question. I think it's funny. Rem or Amelia from ReZero?
Wait, say that again, please?
Rem or Amelia from ReZero?
I don't know what ReZero is.
Don't worry, it's funny. It's funny.
Okay. He's a Revy Bros.
Yeah, there you go. But here's a good one. Is the creator both artist and writer? If so, how does he juggle both priorities?
I'm only the writer. I'll work with Josh Taylor, the artist, on a lot of the layouts. With most comic scripts, from what I understand, the writers typically will describe every panel in detail. I write screenplays more like you would for a movie or a film script. So there's a whole process of, especially when we're writing battles, where I want to focus on certain things. So where it's not just a bunch of interconnected, cool-looking cuts. I actually want to show how the fighting unfolds. I think that's kind of one of the signature things in Black Powder Red Earth. Actually, is the level of detail we put into all of our work. So BPRE specifically has it's a whole process of like, I'll write it. Josh will start doing layouts. He'll come back to me with a bunch of questions. Very often, certainly for the battles, we literally have whole maps with a series of arrows. It's almost like those old World War II shows, The World at War, where they show how a campaign follows across. Like it would like the Germans are flowing across Europe, and they would hit here and go there. Well, we literally do that on a granular level with each element in the story. So Josh, as he's telling the story, knows exactly what's happening in terms of where guys are going, what they're looking at, what they're oriented on, what they're paying attention to at any given moment. So it's so I'm not really juggling both, honestly. But I'm involved deeply in the layouts.
Okay. What is your favorite rifle?
I mean, believe it or not, I'm not a super big gun dude. I don't really care about guns that much. I mean, I work with them. They're the most reliable rifle I work with is the M4. I mean, basically the M4 is the standard upon which all other guns are based. Whether doesn't matter the length of the rail system. The M4 is like the most reliable rifle and the most ergonomic rifle that I think exists today. And I worked with people who can have their pick of the litter. They can basically have whatever they want, and they basically always pick an M4.
Okay. What arc would you recommend starting Black Powder with?
If you're totally new to the series, we tell people to start with the newest series, Obari. Obari is a soft reboot of the books and is probably the most accessible, best written, and best illustrated of all the stories. If you Obari is also a work in progress. It's written out. We wrote the complete series before we started publishing it, and so we're currently working on book 7 right now of 10. We anticipate completing the series in late 2025, early 2026 at the rate we're going. So if you want to if you want to get into it, those first 6 issues are great. If you join our Patreon, you can see the new books as we're developing them. We typically get between 10 and 15 pages a month done. And that includes all the penciling, all the ink work, and then all the coloring. If you've already read Obari or you want to start a little bit further back, BPRE Yemen is actually the next place we recommend people go. BPRE Yemen, in the continuity of the story, is actually the first book. It's the formation of the company Cold Harbor, which is sort of like one of the main protagonist forces in the storyline. It tells you how they get off the ground, and it kind of establishes a lot of the ground rules in ways that don't require you to be an expert on Middle Eastern affairs. Our first 2 series, Black Powder Red Earth and Black Powder Red Earth Syria, which were originally published actually under just the name Black Powder Red Earth, books 1 through 8, those require some sophistication in terms of understanding things about Iraq in the late 2000s and early 2010s, because most of the characters in those stories are actually real people. So we don't bother to explain a lot of things about them, because at that point in my development as a writer, I was very much into the like, oh no, people will just go and find out. They'll go look on their own and determine who these people really are. They'll go learn for themselves, not realizing that Arabic names are so alien to people if you're not used to hearing them that it's never going to translate to you. So we typically say that people should go into those first 2 series actually later, and only if they really enjoyed Yemen and Obari.
Okay. Have you ever thought of doing the same thing in another similar setting, like BPRE set in 90s Africa, or going back in time to something like the 30 Years' War, which is similar in premise to BPRE?
We're actually working on a new IP right now. We're called Near Present. Near Present is actually moving forward in time. We're going ahead about 30 years. And we're developing, we have the sort of groundwork for the whole IP, like the broad strokes of what are the big world events that have happened that set up the world. And where we're at now is we're developing a new game, a new 28 millimeter game that's set in that world. So it basically deals with like what we're doing right now is like figuring out what are people fighting about, right? Like, I mean, our BPRE is a story of conflict. Near Present is also going to be a story of conflict. Near Present will also feature private military contractors in the same way that Black Powder Red Earth does, but it's a whole new world, a whole new setting. It's got a lot more futuristic elements in it because it is set 30 years in the future. There's different technologies, different considerations. But yeah, rather than going backwards, we're moving forwards.
Okay. What are your thoughts on the current tanks versus drones argument, cover or concealment?
That's a good one. Think about that for a second. Air power, controlling the airspace has always allowed you to control the ground, like consistently in every war ever. If you dominate the airspace, nothing can happen on the ground without you getting a vote, right? So the proliferation of things like drones, like UAS, especially kinetic UAS, where they're one-way drones, they're very simple to make. They have some kind of explosive charge that can be very directed with a significant degree of fidelity and accuracy. Like meaning you can literally send something into like an open hatch in a tank, for example, or eventually get to the point where you can just strike at an engine of a tank or a tread, disable it, and then let something else kill it. I think that faster is better for vehicles right now. I think that you're seeing we never really covered this in the comics, but like we had seen a move from heavier armored vehicles to things like dirt bikes and side by sides to cover ground faster, and to be able to disperse your forces so that the cost of like spending drones or munitions is not worth the trade-off to kill 1 or 2 guys, right? Like if you kill a tank, you've just destroyed a significant piece of equipment with a very skilled crew. If you blow up a motorcycle, you killed 1 guy on something that cost maybe $2,000. And sustaining things like lighter vehicles that are moving faster, I feel like speed is going to overwhelm speed as it stands now. I think having faster platforms um, are is more valuable than having heavier armored platforms. Essentially, agility and the ability to maneuver is more important than the ability to turtle and just take round after round after round. Because you're eventually going to that armor will be defeated. It's just a matter of time, right?
Okay. Here's the next one. I found the title of this work really interesting. Black Powder Red Earth. What inspired the name? Is it a reference to Special Operation?
So Black Powder Red Earth literally means war. Um, and the original name of Black Powder Red Earth was actually Sawtooth, and that was before I had a deeper understanding of the nature of military operations. I had a more fantastical understanding, and as I spent more time working in the actual national defense space, I became significantly more educated on how wars are actually fought. Because originally the idea of sawtooth is like a tooth on a blade that cuts, right? And like it's part of a bunch of other blades that cut. They're inflicting damage as a whole as they spin and move forward. With Black Powder Red Earth, the inspiration was very much what New York City looked like after 9/11. I remember, after the towers fell, the streets were completely covered in this sort of like white ash, like this powder, like people in buildings, everything had been turned to this like black dust, and it covered everybody except for where the you could see their wounds were bleeding, and the sort of red muddy color as it streamed out of people's ears and noses and eyes.
Okay.
uh, that's where it came from.
Okay. What are your thoughts when an adaptation of a work adds an element that was not present in the original, i.e., the space mysticism in the Halo live action series?
um I think if the original team is not involved with an adaptation, you are always going to see some sort of you're going to see some kind of derivation from the original work, right? Like people are going to try to put their own stamp on it. Now, I'm not actually familiar with the Halo miniseries. I've never watched an episode of it. I've heard things about it, so I can't comment on that specifically. I can say that there are anime that have adapted manga and obviously taken significant liberties with adding or removing things or truncating storylines for length. And I mean these are great works, right? Like Akira is completely, the movie is very different than the manga. I can say that the Ghost in the Shell film is quite different from the manga. It really just takes a small sliver of the manga and adds a bunch of different ideas into it to expand it into that film. So I don't always think it's a bad thing, but it requires a careful hand, and it also requires somebody who believes in the source material and has an understanding of the source material. It is certainly my perception from the outside that many of the adaptations of popular culture, whether it's Game of Thrones, Halo, or Cyberpunk, the Cyberpunk animated series is a great one, where to me that went way off the reservation from what was in the game, but actually delivered an incredibly compelling piece of content. I think that the artistry coming out of the West right now is at such a mediocre to low quality, because most of the writers who are creating content right now are not they're not really like invested in or deeply thinking about what they're doing. Like it feels like when I watch some of these shows, I've tried to watch. I'm not a big Star Wars guy, but I've tried to watch some of the various Star Wars series that have come out over the past couple of years, and it always feels like it's somebody's job. Like they don't like love the source material. They don't understand the source material, and in some ways they resent that the source material is what they're being forced to work on. It was like Mike Nesmith with the Monkees is a great guitar player, but he didn't want to play the songs that were being handed to him because God, what's his name? Neil Diamond wrote all those songs, right? They're great songs.
Yeah, but you can tell.
But he didn't. Yeah, like he had a resentment to being asked to play them, like famously, right? He didn't really like being in the Monkees. He thought it was going to be an opportunity to do his thing. So yeah, I think it really does depend on the individual and their relation with the material. And I bet that you never expected me to talk about the Monkees in an interview about a Modern Warfare comic book. So
Hey, I ain't against it. It's good music. What character from Black Powder Red Earth did you personally like writing?
Um, I think Black Powder Red Earth is a really like writing Black Powder Red Earth is a is not always like a great experience because most of the people are real and most of them are dead. Um, so like in many cases, I'm trying to tell the stories of my dead friends, and I'm not always the best at it. Like, you have to simplify things to make characters be characters to an extent. And it's also why my characters don't typically have huge arcs because when I met these people, they were already the people they would be when they died. So I'm writing my memories of them and how I think they would act in certain situations. Um, and so like when I wrote the end of Assyria specifically, that's I think that's how my friend who the token character is based on died. There was an investigation. He was killed in Jordan, actually, and it was never there was never a conclusive answer to who killed him, whether it was the Russians or Al Qaeda or whoever. Um, but yeah, like I don't actually, believe it or not, I don't actually get a lot of like pleasure writing Black Powder Red Earth. Like it's more of like a journal of like dead people.
Yeah,
I don't
just
think it's the reason most people write stuff.
yeah. Obviously, looking outside, you might think it's just real cool stuff, but looking inside is a lot more personal.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of what I said earlier about the idea of what war was in 2001 and 2002 when I was writing what was called Sawtooth versus when it became Black Powder Red Earth.
What music would you choose to accompany the comic, if any?
So we've created actually a whole soundtrack for Black Powder Red Earth. We've actually created two different ones. There's a soundtrack for the game that we composed with a Japanese guitar player, Takafumi Matsubara, who I was actually in a band with called Gridlink. We were kind of an extreme metal band. The music that we created for the BPRE game was not anything like the music that we created in our band. It's more atmospheric and a lot of like sort of black metal influence. That sort of like sense of foreboding and dread. Um, the new stuff that we're working with the composer is his sort of stage name is Stahl. He's a German writer, like musician, and we've released 4 tracks on our YouTube channel, and we've also released them on our Patreon for download. They are more atmospheric of the Obari series. So if you were going to listen to something, or if you wanted a soundtrack, like those are great sort of like bass lines for whether you're going to read the comics, play the tabletop game, or play the video game, or whatever. Like they all have the right atmosphere.
On the topic of war, do you agree with the Fallout take of war never changes, where people will fight each other despite the ever-changing surroundings and will find reason to? Or do you agree with the Metal Gear take of war has changed, where countries now wage wars by proxy instead of directly going at each other a la Cold War style?
I mean, that's almost like a meaningless abstraction to me. I mean, throughout nature, there is competition um, for resources, right? And that always involves violence, right? Like violence is like integral to nature. I think the police, the guy who's in charge of the prison in the movie Shutter Island says something to that effect, that nature is incredibly violent. I mean, nature is incredibly violent, and at the end of the day, civilization, when it is functioning, essentially acts as a mechanism for us to not use violence to resolve problems. Um, that we have been in an unprecedented period of history where we have really not experienced a tremendous amount of violence, like on an individual level for decades. I mean, that has really turned around in the past few years, unfortunately. Um, and yeah, I mean, I don't actually see the difference between if you pit, if two countries want influence in another country, like, country A and B want influence in country C, so they both back different factions in country C, and country C tears itself apart so that country A and B can ultimately prevent the other from having influence there, and hopefully gain an edge in getting whatever influence they need there, whether it's a port or a place to make some kind of goods or extract some kind of mineral or whatever it may be, right? I mean, that's conflict has always been the same thing, and it's. I mean, if you look in nature, it's the same thing now. It doesn't matter who's doing the fighting. It's still agents. Like it's always somebody's agents are conducting the actual hands-on stuff, right? Like, and whether those are privateers or private military contractors or soldiers or robots or paramilitaries or terrorists, like on a certain level, the big distinction between those is the ruthlessness in how they accomplish goals. And I'll talk about ISIS for a moment. Most people don't realize ISIS is literally a pyramid scheme. It's not actually a religious group at all. It was actually conceived of by members of the Saddam Hussein regime. We've recovered a number of documents that mapped out ISIS prior to its existence. Al Qaeda Iraq was the first step towards that. I mean, this is all about controlling oil wealth and hydrocarbons and being able to export them and make money from it. Okay. That's all ISIS really is. All the other stuff is a veneer of belief systems thrown on top of that to incentivize people to be agents of that.
Yeah.
So yeah, at the end of the day, I don't think war has changed. I don't think it's a dramatic thing, and I don't think as much as I enjoy Metal Gear, I don't think Hideo Kojima's a particularly insightful guy when it comes to human beings. No offense to Kojima. I mean, again, I actually really like Metal Gear.
Yeah.
But I don't play his games and think, man, this guy really changed my life. He's got some uniquely insightful thoughts about, fill in the blank.
Yeah, end of the day, he's an old hippie.
I mean, he listens to Depeche Mode,
Yeah. As someone working on his own novel, do you recommend new writers to do self-publishing or go with an established publisher?
I think at this point, it's really difficult to endorse working with any publishing company because what they're ultimately going to do most likely is to push as much of the risk onto you as the creator as they can. I don't think we're at a point anymore where publishing houses really provide much for their creators unless they have some kind of established audience. It's just like publishing a video game. You can have the best video game idea in the world. If you go to Steam with it, if you go direct, you can hope word of mouth is going to get it out there. But and you own the whole thing. You own all the risk. You own everything. You own the IP. So if it goes well, great. If it doesn't, well, you're really screwed. But if you do that with a publisher, it ends up being the same thing because if it doesn't go well, then they just own all your IP and you're left with nothing and you have to start over.
Okay.
So I do tend to, especially at this point, given how easy it is to do self-publishing, there's not a lot of incentive to not self-publish, but just recognize that producing anything, especially with social media being in the state that it is now, is a huge lift. It is not easy to get noticed anymore.
Next one, and you did kind of answer this when you were rambling, but it's a good one to kind of just put on record for people who are probably looking for the answer. Have you ever been reached out by major studios or notable directors and producers for an adaptation? If not, who would you like to see adapt your work, and how would you like it done? Animated, live action, radio series, more video games, etc.
We spoke. There were a couple of Western, I don't know what to call them, talent aggregators, like content aggregators that we had spoken to at one point earlier on in the history of the franchise, and those relationships never really went anywhere. I think Beep Fury was too real for them. I don't think there was an easy roadmap to take that and turn it into something that would be a little bit more accessible. And to be honest, our early work is not super accessible. So we did work on an anime series. We had spent significant effort on an anime series, which is now being produced as Black Powder Red Earth Albari, our current series. I would love to see an animated adaptation of our work. In fact, Albari was written as a series for Netflix Japan. We were going to be producing it as animated originally, with the idea of potentially doing some one-shot insert graphic novels that would support the sort of the animation. At the end of the day, COVID happened. It basically torpedoed the entire series. We were never able to really recover from it, and we were so deeply invested in producing the series that ultimately we were forced to make it into a graphic novel.
Yeah.
Which is why it's much longer than any of our other books, because most of our other books are written to be 3 or 4 chapters. This was written to be 10 because that's what Netflix wanted for a series. They wanted a 10-episode arc. It's also why we don't have quite as much combat in the show, the series, as we did some of our earlier books, because doing that much combat was going to drive the budget through the roof. So I mean, I would love to be able to do an animated series. I mean, I'd love to be able to do a live action series. I've actually directed a number of commercial pieces for Bravo Company Manufacturing, specifically showcasing special operations capabilities and training. So, I mean, and I'd love to be able to direct it, but I think realistically, the cost of producing something like BPRI would be beyond what anyone would invest in producing it. So I think the animation would get us the closest we have to something that feels like what we want it to feel like. But you know, in terms of who would held that project, there's a lot of great directors out there, and there's a lot of great artists. I mean, I would selfishly want to work with Otomo Katsuhiro to direct our thing, but I don't think that's a realistic possibility.
It is said that reality is often stranger than fiction. Do you agree or disagree with this sentiment, and doesn't influence Black Powder Red Earth?
Black Powder Red Earth has the rather unique position of attempting to be a work of speculative fiction. So most of the things that are happening in our books are based on projections forward of events that are happening today. As a result, our books have actually featured a number of things that have ended up happening after they were written. In fact, it's happened quite a few times now. So I've never really seen, like, good fiction accurately reflects our world because it's believable. Typically, there's something about it that's tangible that you can connect with. Whether that is a war story or a story about 2 teenage girls trying to find their way in Japan, like Nana, which is one of my favorite manga of all time. One of my favorite animated shows as well, which seems kind of out of nowhere. But going with that, I think that no, truth isn't stranger than fiction. Honestly, I think that all the best works of fiction and literature and storytelling are basically just a reflection of reality.
Okay. What is the average time to complete a page of the comic?
Mother of God. I couldn't tell you per page, but I know that we average between 11 and 14 pages a month, depending on the complexity of the pages. So book 7 is a giant battle. It's almost a 90-page book. It's a massive, sprawling fight. We are taking way longer to do pages. I think Josh told me one spread, he had 40 hours in it alone, like a whole week to do one spread. Yeah, I mean, the level of detail and fidelity in these books is kind of unparalleled. I mean, one of the nice things about Patreon and that we've really been able to use to make our work stronger is because we're crowdfunded, and because our audience is passionate about delivering the quality level that we deliver on every book, they understand that it takes time. I mean, because there's no way to rush stuff like this. We would never be able to publish Black Powder Red Earth at the quality level we're doing now if we were required to put out like 25 pages a month. It just wouldn't be possible.
Yeah.
You know, even Yemen, which didn't have all of the incredible rich color, it was much more monochromatic, more of a black and white style book. Even that, we were only doing about 17 pages a month, and that was kind of killing Josh at the time, honestly. To the point where he said he never wanted to work that much on a book. Like one month he did 20 pages, and he's like, I can't feel my hand anymore, John.
Yeah, that poor guy.
Yeah, I mean, again, like, you know, Josh also has the latitude of, like, you know, he just does the best work that anybody's ever seen every month, and then nobody bothers him. Like, he can do whatever he wants to deliver that quality every month.
Yeah, as long as he can, yeah.
Exactly, so.
All right. This kind of feeds into an earlier question. Which character was the most difficult to kill off?
Who's the most difficult to kill off? again, because most of the people in the books are dead. I mean, I already have them in my mind as dead when I'm writing them. So I will say that the one that I thought was the most real was well, Crane's. It's funny. Crane survives Yemen, um, but he doesn't really, right? Like when his counterparts die, he dies. He's like what's left of his humanity is gone, but he's still alive.
Yeah.
And I think it was when Hesher gets killed in the house, because like you know that's happened to so many people that I've worked with or no or worked adjacent to, right? Like great dude, highly skilled, dedicated, family man, beloved, respected, was the best fighter that anybody knew, died in 1 second in a
Yeah.
house blowing up. He had, never had a chance. Never got it. Never, the worst part about that is like we at the time we were pursuing everybody when that guy got killed in real life. When we didn't have to pursue everybody. We were on autopilot because it's what like our units did. It's what we were focused on, is like tracking down these bad guys and just killing them, versus just like, oh, he's in the house, blow up the house. Like, why are we going into the goddamn house? There's nobody to save in there. And we just didn't do it that way because we were fighting a counterterrorism war versus an actual war of like destruction. Like you would, like in World War II, they weren't doing room clearing, right? Like they took machine gun fire from a house, they hit the house with an artillery round and moved to the next house. So when he died in the book, I know that was a real moment for a lot of people when he got killed, because it was like he's fucking gone.
Yeah.
So that was maybe the one that's the one that when I wrote it was the most real. I mean, the other one is when Token gets killed at the end of his book of Syria, but that again, that's what I imagine happened to the real Token. It's not, I don't know if that's actually how he ended up. I just know how they found him.
Okay. Okay. Next one. Thoughts on Berserk?
Oh, I mean, Berserk is an incredible work. One of my favorite manga. One of the best, and such an incredible story. Like I mentioned Nana early. My what I am instinctively drawn to is stories about like combat and warfare and young men fighting each other for whatever reason. Like that has always drawn me to those kind of stories. And like how you become stronger, but it also makes you harder. It like you have to kill a part of yourself to survive. Like that's something that's always resonated with me. And Berserk is very much in that story. It's that vein of that kind of story of a man who's literally had everything taken away from him, and he's trying to put the pieces back together by destroying, destroying these things that caused him so much pain. And I feel like Berserk is especially because of the art, because of the like the for lack of a better word, the aggression in the style of the renderings. It uniquely communicates the emotional state of the character in ways that very few other books do. I mean, I consider Berserk a unique masterpiece, especially those first couple of arcs, right? Like the later arcs still beautifully illustrated, still a lot of interesting story stuff, but I don't know if it's the first two or the first three. I think I'd probably go for the first three arcs where Guts' character is so like it's crazy. Like you have so much empathy for a guy who's so hateful and angry, and like it's funny because the story tries to push you away from him in the same way that he tries to push away characters in the story itself. And that's unique. Like it's a very unique style of storytelling, and he did a fantastic job with it. It's a real shame that the creator is no longer with us, and we're never going to really see the end of the story, if you
Oh,
will.
which is better, Halo, Call of Duty, or Battlefield?
Those are three really different games. I mean, I can tell you as a player, I I have historically enjoyed Battlefield more than the other games. Um, there is there is no game that has had the impact on me as the first Call of Duty Modern Warfare game when you come out of that chopper after the mission has failed and you die. I don't think any game ever had that kind of impact on me. They've never been able to top it in any of the successor games or the remakes. I mean, that was such a unique moment, and it was so. I don't. It's one of those moments where I wonder if they knew how good that, like how that became like such a definitive moment for the game, because they seem to just try to escalate with more and more shocking stuff after that. But really, nothing was more personal than you literally dying after failing a mission, and like then the world goes on without you. I thought that was really powerful. Halo never had a moment like that for me. I wanted to love Halo way more than I did. Um, True story. Being a Mac guy, I actually played earlier builds of Halo when it was still a strategy game. I was actually at the Mac World when Bungie unveiled it and the original version of it, and I was at it was called the Bungie. It was Bungie org, and there was a big gathering of all the people who loved Marathon and Myth and like Oni, the earlier Bungie games, and we got together with a bunch of the Bungie guys and this guy Hamish Sinclair, and we had made a T-shirt for Hamish. He'd run what was called a website called marathonstory.org, which was all about the incredibly complex and layered narrative of the Marathon games, which is very has a lot of parallels with like with the games like Armored Core and some of these other games that are more popular now, like Dark Souls, where like there's so much there. You can skip all of it if you want to, but there's so many layers to it.
There's an entire ocean there if you go looking.
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually really passionately loved Halo in its earlier stages, and I was so disappointed with the game that they finally released. I think I was one of the first people to finish the campaign, and I literally went to a GameStop that had it hooked. They had an Xbox, they had the game hooked up, and I went in there and I started playing it, and I got there at like 10 in the morning, and I ended up spending all day. I beat the game in the GameStop, and I was like, that's it. It's just the game forwards and backwards, and it's terrible. It's so stupid. It and then Halo 2, I wanted to believe that was going to be good, and I absolutely hated it. I thought the writing was completely ham-fisted and the graphics were terrible, and I was so disappointed that it didn't look anything like the E3 demo that they had showed everybody. And then Halo 3 came out, and it was the first one that I didn't hate, so I was like, I actually had some positive feelings about it. But I'll be honest, the thing I like most about Halo is the commercials that they made for Halo 3 and ODST. I thought those were the most powerful things. The one where they were in the museum and they were talking about like people who fought with the chief and died around him, or the Believe commercial with the diorama, or the Neil Blomkamp stuff. Those were incredible. Where was that emotional content? Where were those moments in the game? They were completely absent. Nothing like that ever grabbed me in the games. I never played Reach, but I understand that had a very powerful ending. Like the conclusion of that game was apparently fantastic, but I was done with Halo by that point. So for campaign wise, Call of Duty Modern Warfare is one of the best campaigns I ever played in my life at the time. You go back and play it now, and it's really not all that amazing. But at the time, like the impact it had on me was profound. And I can say that Battlefield, love it or hate it, has done some incredible stuff and made again, as an IP over the history of the game. I really liked Battlefield 2 when it came out, and I really loved Battlefield 3 when it came out. I loved Battlefield 3. From a gameplay perspective, I thought it was amazing. I liked the campaign in it also. Battlefield 4, I did not particularly love the campaign, and I didn't particularly like the multiplayer. I didn't like the maps. I didn't like a lot of the choices they made. Battlefield World War I, pretty damn good game. Didn't expect to like it, ended up loving it. Battlefield 5, absolutely hated it. Like total mess, unplayable catastrophe. And then, we were talking about Battlefield 2042. I wanted to love that game, and they have made a lot of improvements to it, but it's still kind of a train wreck. And so, I will say, though, I still play Battlefield. I don't play Halo. I don't play Call Call of Duty. Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
honestly, if you, yeah, I would say Battlefield is probably, if I had to pick between those three, Battlefield overall is the IP I like the most.
And this kind of relates to it. Favorite games that inspired you?
Um, the two biggest games that's funny. Okay, so from like world building perspective, Armored Core and the game Techie, which was, I think, came out here under the name Steel Battalion. But Armored Core would have so much to do with my career later on. I mean, when I went on to work in the national defense industry, specifically working for companies that were the privatization of national defense, like that was our mission. Like that was what we did. We built equipment, we built training. We prepared people to go overseas. Like Armored Core. I mean, the people that I don't know if you know this. Blackwater's call signs in Iraq early on were Raven.
Oh yeah, yeah. I didn't even get that.
Yeah,
Oh
yeah. So
wow.
there's a lot there, right? Like there's a lot there. Um, Armored Core is like it's funny because I don't even like all the games in the Armored Core series, but like overall historically, it's been with me my whole life. It was one of the first PlayStation games I purchased. Aside from like Biohazard and Philoctema and I think Alone in the Dark. There were no, not Alone in the Dark. It was some other game. It was the game that the game that was the third game in the Flashback trilogy. But there were like Armored Core has been with me forever. And yeah, has affected my design in so many ways. Uh, and I would say if I had to pick one more, it would probably be Chrono Trigger,
Really?
which is a masterpiece of an RPG. Um, and another one of those games where like there was really heavy emotional stuff in the game that I did not expect to happen. Like there's things in that game that I never figured out how to do. For example, oh god, I can't remember her name right now. The girl with the glasses. Oh god, not Kayla. Chrono's friend from the village he grew up in. Um, there's a scene in the game. Her mother is crippled when you meet her. Her leg. She was horribly injured in some sort of mechanical accident before you ever you when you start the game, she's already walking around on crutches.
Yeah.
And there's a moment in the game where you can take over this character and go back in time to try to prevent your mother from getting injured. And I was never able to successfully do it. She was always forever injured in that accident. I was never able to save her. And it was sort of like Magus, like how he loses his sister, and that's what makes him who he is, right? Like Chrono Trigger is such an elegant story of like trying to save the world and failing over and over, and then only somehow at the end being able to do it. I mean, I probably have more hours in Chrono Trigger than any other role playing game I ever experienced. It's funny, I sold the cartridge years ago for like God knows the amount of money it was worth was so much money. I was like, I can't justify keeping this thing anymore. But I had actually unlocked every single ending. I had done every single attack, and I'd maxed out every single character's stats. I'd played the game so many times. I mean, I absolutely loved Chrono Trigger. While Final Fantasy VII has a lot of great things going for it, also, I think Chrono Trigger was such a unique experience that it made me think about storytelling in games in a way that I don't know if I ever encountered something as emotionally powerful as that again. So
Okay.
yeah, I'd say Chrono Trigger.
Okay. Next one. For what are your next goals for the franchise?
Well, Black Powder Red Earth, we're going to finish the current series out. We think the Obari series is our best. It's the best war story we've told to date. It's our best story to date. I think the conclusion is something that a lot of people are not going to see coming. Um, it's the heaviest series I've written in terms of like where it's going, and I think it tells a story that's different than the other stories, which I'm also very excited about. Now, where do we go after this? We've completed the first edition of our tabletop miniature game. We're really happy with that. There has been talk of us attempting to to turn that into a video game, I'm not sure how we would do that. The amount of money we would need to crowdfund to do something like that would be, I think, beyond what we're going to be able to raise, to be honest with you. I mean, game development's expensive, right? Like
Yeah.
it would cost at least $1 million to turn that into a video game. And I just don't see us raising $1 million. So what we're actually working on right now is we're developing a whole new IP called Near Present. Near Present is further forward, another war story. It features things like private military contractors again, hard science fiction, but like still military. Not Gundam, it's not like space colonies or anything like that. No aliens either, though. It's still humans versus humans. And we're very focused. Like I have been working on that almost full time for the past like 3 months now, trying to build that out and create an experience and create a story that's different from what we've already done, but also still has a lot of the same. It's got a lot of the, what I mean. It's got like it's the same connections like between Bloodborne and say Dark Souls. That's kind of how I view Near Present, right?
Okay.
There's going to be a lot of similar ideas, but the world is going to be radically different.
Yeah, it's going to do its own thing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of things having an ending. We've done Black Powder Red Earth now for almost 15 years since we've been publishing it, and the reality is that like these days, it's really, really hard to get new people interested in what we're doing because we're so totally suppressed. And I don't know if it's just us. I feel like social media in general is not a tool for people to discover new things the way that it used to be.
Yeah.
And I also feel like that people are looking more for laughs than they are for thoughtful content, which is a challenge because a lot of what I write is not particularly funny.
Yeah, it's very grim.
Yeah. So I mean, one of the things we're hoping, one of the things that we've heard over the past couple of years is that like, one of the things that keeps people away from BPRE is it's so real, it's actually upsetting. Like it's really upsetting for people to sit down and read the books or play the games or whatever. Like it just really bothers them. And like to have something that's a little bit more abstract, something a little bit more in the future, it'll allow us to discuss some of the same ideas. It'll allow us to talk about some of the same ideas, but maybe in a way that's going to be able to reach people without like traumatizing them as immediately and dramatically as a story set today is.
Yeah. Okay, next one. Thoughts on Rainbow Six?
I haven't played Rainbow Six since the 90s. The only Rainbow Six game I've ever played was on the Mac. It was the very first one. And it was kind of a janky game. It didn't really connect with me. I actually ended up liking the first Ghost Recon games, the PC games. I like the first 3 Ghost Recon games far more than I ever liked Rainbow Six. It was more of a military mission, not a counterterrorism mission, which I understood a little bit better. It's funny. One of the things that really didn't work for me in Rainbow Six was how janky a lot of the movement was and how the guys actually prosecuted targets, or how you could control your guy.
Yeah.
And it's funny when I finally did get actual like hands-on training doing those kind of missions and like actually going through like hostage recovery training and things like that and shooting, it's so much easier than the game actually tries to make it out to be. That like Rainbow Six never connected with me because it just felt so alien. I mean, honestly, it's going to sound anathema to some people. Call of Duty, if played with actual infantry tactics, feels more like actual CQB than Rainbow Six ever has.
There's a dude having a stroke right now from some of your takes.
Yeah, I mean, I get it, but like the reality is like HR's hostage rescue is fast. Like, there's a like when you're fighting in buildings with guns is a terrible idea generally, right? Like you're in a house with rifles, people are getting shot. It's like fighting people with knives. It's something you should avoid, right? Like so much of the skill and so much of the like. So much of all the planning and all the equipment is completely nullified when you're firing at somebody with a rifle from 10 feet away inside of a room.
Yeah.
Like so much of all of the advantages, so much of that shit goes out the window. So how like if you actually have to storm a building like to rescue a hostage, the thought process of the commander is I'm going to kill every one of my guys down to me dying as well to secure the hostage because that's what we signed up for. So mission success is my entire team is dead and the hostages are secure and the threat is destroyed.
Yeah.
It's a completely different way than those games think about things. People who design those games, it's one of two things. When those games were developed, the people who were giving feedback to the development team were thinking about hostage rescue in a completely different way than I was trained to later. And granted, I wasn't trained to do hostage rescue. I didn't go through any of that training till like 2004. So significantly later on. And in like a game like Ghost Recon, you could like the kind of stuff you're doing, like sort of a bounding movement. In a bounding movement, you know, like you can simulate that in in the original Ghost Recon games. You can't really do like if you're bounding through a house, like if you've seen the movie Zero Dark 30.
Yeah.
The reason they're going so meticulously and slowly through that house is because they don't want to blow up the house, but they're not in a rush to get any place. They're on their timeline, right? Like it is completely at their discretion how fast they want to go through that house and clear it. When you're doing an HR, when you're doing a hostage rescue, you are supposed to you're basically moving as quickly as possible to the hostages to save them, right? And you know, you look at like the military perspective, which is like the special operations hostage rescue perspective, is very much the only way you will successfully rescue hostages, right? Like there's so much stuff that was done in law enforcement for so long that doesn't actually work against a determined opponent or a willing opponent who is okay with actually causing loss of life, right? Like if you're a criminal, you're a rational actor. Like the hostage is how you're not getting shot, right?
Yeah.
Like you're using them as a shield. So shooting a hostage is almost a last resort for you. When you're fighting against a determined agent whose mission is not survival, but to achieve another objective through violence, they have no qualms about inflicting pain and death on the people that they are in control of. That's the entire reason they're there.
Yeah.
So yeah, like in an actual hostage rescue mission, you are willing to accept tremendous losses if necessary to secure hostages.
Okay.
You know, like and Rainbow Six doesn't teach you to do that. I dare say that I haven't ever played a hostage rescue game really. I haven't played Ready or Not, actually, believe it or not. I have it. I just never actually fired it up.
Yeah.
But I've never played an actual realistic game that teaches you that casualties are acceptable, which was part of the BPRE game, right? The whole BPRE game was not about like doing perfect runs. The BPRE computer game that you played is trying to teach people critical thinking about how do you approach a target when you have very limited resources and you have a very limited time in an area before you're going to be compromised.
Yeah.
Right? You're four guys. Like the fact that so many people complained about like simple things like, well, when I do a CTR action on a building, guys come out and they shoot at me. I'm like, okay, why are you standing on the side of a building in front of a door where they're going to come out?
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you just position yourself in a place that is going to not expose your guys to fire? Well, nobody thought about that because they've been brainwashed by XCOM to play these games in a completely like the game XCOM has absolutely no connection with a tactical reality.
Yeah,
it's a complete fantasy. It's a game. That's not what BPRE has ever been. Our games are not games in that sense of the word. Our games are actually our critical thinking simulators, right? Like they're not, I mean, it's obviously not a complete simulation of reality, like that's impossible. Yeah. But like we're focusing on the things that are important for decision making. How do you look at a structure and start figuring out how to deal with that problem, right?
Yeah.
Like you're 4 guys, right? We actually made bumper stickers at one point that said speed is security. We used to have 4 rules for BPRE. Don't fight the whole city. Speed is security. Never go into a gunfight with only one gun. I.e., if you're going to expose one of your guys, be sure that you have another guy to cover him if somebody shows up out of the building. Like, make sure you are minimizing your risk for your dudes because you only get 4 of them, right?
Yeah.
Like, build procedures that are based on actual thinking about a problem and not just blindly crashing into it and like crossing your fingers and being like, M4, let's do it. That teaches people terrible lessons,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like, and that we don't want to do that with our games. So anyway, hopefully I answered that question.
Yeah. Next one is, what was your least favorite panel? I assume it's like to write or just it didn't turn out how you wanted, that kind of thing.
I don't really have one a least favorite panel. I mean, when you look back at your earlier work, I mean, I can tell you that I wish I had done a better job writing the original series, because I had some ideas in my head of how I wanted the series to develop initially, and I think we did a good job executing them. I think Josh, to his credit, did excellent work with some rather amateurish writing, unfortunately, on my part. But I mean, really, that's the big thing. I wish I had paced the original series better. I don't think especially the first issue is too slow. I mean, I don't know if I've spoken to this, but one of the reasons we took the original series out of print was because people would start reading BPRE Book 1, which is the worst thing I've ever written. I mean, it's the first thing I ever wrote, so of course it's the worst thing I've ever written, right? Like, I've gotten better.
Yeah, just the growing pains.
Yeah. So what was happening is people were buying Book 1 and then never getting any more books. And when we took the first series out of print and just let people start with Syria, which, not perfect, but it's a much better overall. The writing and the flow and the pacing is better. They stick around and they pick up Yemen. Like, we could actually see a dramatic change in the numbers on our Amazon sales from when the original series was in print versus when it was out of print, which is why we now only offer it on the Patreon or as the exclusive in the collected edition.
Next one, you ever consider doing crossover events, i.e. promos with other franchises and, say, gacha games, or is the lore so hard-locked that it'd be weird to have outside influences show up in your work?
What is a gacha game?
You ever play like Fate Go, Blue Archive, those?
No.
Okay. Essentially, the idea of a gacha game is you are pulling characters. It is a lot like a casino. You're opening loot boxes or various boxes / rolls to get characters. They can have different art to them, different animations to them, stuff like that.
I see Courier saying Girls Frontline. Okay.
Yeah, Girls Frontline, things like that.
Okay, well, let me answer this question then. We have never considered doing any crossovers with games like that. I don't think that our work, it's not that it's completely incompatible. I understand that some of those series actually are very well written. I don't think that that's what that audience is looking for, though.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you don't play a game like that because you want to see gnarly looking dudes, kitted out with weapons, like brutally killing people and being killed. You want to see the cute girls. You like the guns. You like the powers, whatever the outfits. You collect the figures. Yeah. It's all good. I mean, I'm totally cool with stuff like that. It's not what I'm interested in, and I don't think their audience wants what we're doing, and I don't think my audience necessarily wants what they're doing. And I think that part of that is not. I mean, clearly a lot of people who like Black Powder Red Earth are actually really into anime, and like we have a huge Ace Combat fandom overlap for some reason. But I don't think that like we have a lot of people playing those kind of games anymore because I mean they're kind of time killers, right? Like I don't think they're not like people once you get into the BPRE world, I think, and especially if you're into our games, like it really becomes about skill. And while we have made references to Japanese culture in our books, it's almost like the funny side of things, right? Like we had a bunch of cultural interactions when we were making the anime, when we were working on that, meeting the team, talking to people about opportunities, and for sure, there's a whole science to that I don't totally understand. Like, I mean, like I understand like thinking a character in an anime is cute. Um, I don't understand I don't get closer to that character by playing something like where I'm opening loot boxes.
Yeah.
Like I'm not forming a deeper bond with that character. Yeah, I don't know.
All right, so this will be the second to last one. What was it like trying to get the series started?
It was a leap of faith. Um, nobody was doing anything like Black Powder Red Earth when we started publishing it. And I mean, it's arguable that and I don't think anybody's really doing anything like Black Powder Red Earth now. 15 years later, it's not a million seller book. We have sold quite a few comic books. I think the last I checked, we were over 60,000 copies sold total, which is that's a really good number for an indie series, right? I mean, honestly, that's better than some mainstream books, from what I understand. But across the 4 different series, I believe we've done about 60,000 books. The biggest thing is that we invested our own money to make the thing. We've never taken outside investment for this company ever. So every dollar that's spent is money that could be spent on something else. That's allowed us to have far more creative control, but it's made it much harder to grow. It's also made it much harder to sign deals, because the 1 or 2 times we have talked with people about potentially doing like Black Powder Red Earth stuff, they want to own the IP. They want to acquire the IP for their investment, and I'm not willing to give that up right now.
Yeah, it'd be handing over something you built to people that you just frankly, not to sound rude, but just don't trust.
Your question earlier about like what I think about like IP that deviate from the the adaptation deviates from the source material. I think I don't think I'm some unique genius by any stretch of the imagination. I do think I have a command of the material that I talk about better than 99% of most other people I've interacted with, who don't literally have the exact background, the professional background. I mean, I've been privy to a lot of relationships and training and conversations that, I mean, are based on relationships that were built over the course of 15 years, 20 years, 10 years, whatever it is, right? Like, you don't just get inside the circle of trust with somebody. And a game here. So here's a great example. The first game, Mercenaries, is actually one of my that I didn't mention it earlier, but Mercenaries is actually one of my favorite. That was one of my favorite games. In fact, I think it was the only reason I kept my Xbox, was to play that game.
Yeah.
After I finished Techie. What a great game. And it actually had a lot of real PMC shit in it. Like it allowed you to do all kinds of cool stuff. I loved taking, like local national cars and sneaking into enemy camps, doing a quick snatch, throwing the guy in the back of the car and like driving off a cliff or something, calling in the chopper after throwing airstrikes all over the place. I'm like, this is exactly how they did it in Vietnam. This is the SOG mission right here. Like a MACV SOG mission. And like they actually made a second game, Mercenaries 2, and they got input from people in the community, like some guys I actually, I don't have personal relationships with them, but like they're 1 degree of separation type thing, and the guidance they gave them, Mercenaries 2 is terrible. It was nowhere as fun. It wasn't as interesting. Like it was just it had all the pieces it needed to be like a better game, but it just wasn't. And I never knew exactly what drove them to make those changes, given the access they suddenly had. So I just don't, I don't know. Like I don't like any, like I don't particularly like the Terminalist. I don't give a shit about Clear and Present Danger. I don't care about what's his name? Jack Ryan. I don't care about any of those shows. I don't like any of them. Like none of it does anything for me. I mean, there's stuff in Jack Ryan I should absolutely be like totally into, but all it looks like is I don't know. It just like I saw Lioness. There's things in Lioness I thought that were kind of cool.
Yeah.
But I really didn't like the show very much. Like it just, it's like rather than being like Hill Street Blues, they found like the one wild story. They're like, we're gonna tell this crazy wild story, and this is gonna be the one that we tell. And like like as much. It's funny. Like I'm sort of like going off on a tangent here, but like Sicario, I really like the movie Sicario.
Oh yeah, Sicario is awesome.
Not because it's technically accurate though. I like the emotional beats in the movie more than anything else. I didn't care for Sicario 2. I wanted to like it, but I really didn't care for it at all. But you know, all of the technical detail, so much of what goes down in Sicario makes absolutely no sense to me, and I can't imagine anybody doing anything that way, given the choice. Like you'd have to be in some really, you know, like I don't know. I don't want to tear the movie apart for like like little details, but so much of the movie doesn't make any sense. Like it's like the only reason you would do things like this is to make the story happen. And I mean, I guess that's a lot of writing today though. And I don't know if this is a good enough answer to the question here, but like I don't know. I don't know where to go from it from here. Did I give you a good answer? Is that satisfying?
I think that works. I think that works.
Okay, you can edit it, some of it, if you need to.
It's fine. It's fine. And the final one, because this actually has to do with stuff my channel is involved in. We're currently working on a comic project that we're getting off the ground, a little indie thing. So I guess just kind of as the final lead-in question is, do you have any advice for somebody that's trying to get a project like this off the ground and kind of try to establish themselves in any way they can?
Okay, so there's three things that were really helpful for launching Black Powder Red Earth. The first and the biggest one is the ability to self-publish. Using Amazon's KDP services, you can produce a very high quality finished product that will be accessible to people anywhere in the world, and it won't cost you really a dime, other than whatever it costs you to make it and design it. Like if you've ever picked up a hard copy of our books, you know that what they ship is a really high quality.
Yeah.
And it's also made regionally, which is nice. So like if you have customers in Germany or England, they can just buy it from Amazon in their country. It's printed locally and they get the same quality book, which is fantastic. Because each book is individually printed to order, or maybe they print them in lots of 10, I don't know. But like you're getting a digital printed book, so it's a really high quality. So I guess the first thing is take advantage of print on demand. KDP specifically is excellent. They do a really good job with comic books.
Okay.
That's going to save you so much overhead, which is the biggest problem we run into with our tabletop game is keeping inventory and managing cash flow is not something we were ready to do, and we jumped into it just both feet in the water. So
Yeah.
that good and bad. Okay, so the second thing I would say, don't be afraid to do smaller chunks initially, and don't be afraid to fix things after you've created them. Meaning, so like if you're going to use a Patreon is if you have an audience, Patreon is a great mechanism, or Subscribestar, whatever you're doing, is a great mechanism to get people to help fund the development of the project. Accordingly, you can get feedback in real time as you publish stuff. So if you have like an idea for a 30-page story, just make that up, right?
Yeah.
That's a pretty not simple, right? A 30-page story is sophisticated. If you're going to launch something like the Berserk, the prototype story, I listened to your video. You talk about that. Just target that.
Yeah.
Make that 30-page story, and then like if it's good, make it better, because the first thing you do is never going to be the best thing you do, and it's really rare that you even get like, I mean, there were so many drafts, dude. There's so many drafts of the first 20 pages of the original BPRE comic, trying to do that scene where they kidnap the guy in the back of the restaurant. It was so difficult to draw that. So yeah, don't be afraid to go back, and especially at the beginning, don't be a go back and fix things, or make a couple of short stories first. Figure out where your strengths are, and then go back and turn it into something bigger. That was a very common practice among science fiction authors in the 70s and the 60s, where they were literally writing for Asimov. They would write like short stories because they needed to pay their rent, and basically they were amalgamating a series of short stories that they would then coalesce into a full book. Like Philip
Okay.
K. Dick did that a lot. And it's a great way to because it's easier to write something with a beginning and an end and short, right? Like try to keep your ambitions compact. As a game designer, I can tell you one of the hardest things I ever had to fight against was I wanted to make Metal Gear Solid. I
Yeah.
wanted to make the big game. I do not have the resources to make that game. And trying to make that game initially, when we were doing our original sci-fi themed BPRE, was killing my team. Like I expected too much from people. I didn't know how to personally deliver on what I wanted to do, and we were just going too fast, too far, too far, too fast. Have an anticipation that try to. It's something I do in business now. I say always focus on the next 100 meters. You'll get to where you're going eventually, but do it 100 meters at a time. Because when you get to the 100 meters, you can now see the next 100 meters more clearly, and you can reorient based on what's in front of you, right? Like don't charge headlong into problems if you don't fucking have to. Sometimes you are gonna have to do that, but like try to minimize it because it's exhausting. And at my age, it's really exhausting. But that's a separate story. And then I guess the final bit of advice: don't be especially if you're doing a visual narrative, don't be afraid to use photographs to figure out your panels. Like absolutely don't be afraid to use photographs to figure out your panels. Or if you're using 3D posers or whatever, try like again, we learned this in game design. Find something that's already out there that you can do quickly to rough things out. The faster you can rough them out, the faster you can figure out how things look better or worse. Like
Okay.
shoot different versions of things. I mean, I can't tell you the building like BPRE, the tabletop game essentially uses 9 structures to make all of the like 40 maps that are in the game, or 30 some odd maps, whatever it is. Just like any other video game. Because like the amount of effort it takes to build those structures and figure out those angles is difficult. And so once you get something that works, man, like that's going to be awesome. But like I can't tell you how many times we iterated the shapes of the buildings and like the angles in the buildings when Legos, and how much faster it went with Legos versus trying to draw shit out or build little cardboard structures. Dude, Legos solved so many of our problems. We were able to just go so fast. And compositionally, if you've never read it, there's a great book. Oh God, what's it called? Is it called Camera Obscura? Hang on one second. I'm actually going to pause to look on Amazon to tell you what this book is called because it's a fantastic book.
Yeah.
And if you've never, it's the best book on doing layouts. It's actually a filmmaking book, but it's the best book on filmmaking. And it applies to everything you're ever going to do with panel layout. Is it called Camera Obscura? What's it called? Hang on. Where is it called? Christ almighty. Oh, I think it's called Shot by Shot. Stand by.
Okay. So shot by shot standby. That's what it's called.
No, Shot by Shot. I'm sorry. Shot by Shot is the name of the book. Hang on. I just want to make sure. Oh yeah, it's called. If you search on Amazon for Shot by Shot film directing, it is. Yeah, I'll send it to you in the chat here. This is an incredible book about how to choreograph scenes because it tells you how the human eye works, which is it's funny, as a photographer and a filmmaker, I should have known all this shit and I didn't. Because it totally applies. And when we were looking at manga, when we were doing a lot of our panel layout, they all do this stuff too. They do. I don't know if they use the same book or they do it instinctively, but like comic page direction is no different than scene direction. It's just laid out a little. You just have a little bit more complexity because you can see multiple things at the same time.
Yeah.
So like figuring out how to carry an eye through a story is great. The other thing that I know is bigger drawings work better on social media. That'll be my final bit of advice is like spreads don't translate great to PDFs, but what they do translate great to is social media. So when you're trying to promote your work, bigger detailed drawings sell your work better than smaller series of panels will.
Okay.
So, I mean, hopefully those are. I'm sorry for the little gap there, but like shot by shot is really absolutely essential for anybody doing any kind of storytelling.
Okay, yeah. All right, well, that's about all I have at the moment. We went through our pretty good list of questions. We got a good ramble session. I can splice in at the end and give people some background noise to sit on and chew through. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I hope this has been good for you. We've been talking for a while, so like, oh my God, is it really 1 a.m. here? Holy
Yeah.
shit.
Yeah.
Um,
It has been immensely interesting. I will say that.
well, that's cool. I'm glad.
Yeah.
I'm glad. I'm at least that. I've been told that I have a tendency to interview myself, and that that has worked out well for some of the wargaming podcasts that I've spoken to, where like they're used to talking to these super nerdy guys who basically, they don't they're constantly waiting for like they're asking for things to talk about versus like I could just go off on a tangent for 10 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but I do want to say thank you again for giving us the coverage of our book. We really appreciate it. It has translated to more sales for us, so it's absolutely had a positive effect. Thank you very much.
Yep.
And Courier, this is the first time I'm talking to you by voice. I want to say thank you also for getting Loli to do a piece on us. I really appreciate that too. Like, it's very hard these days to grow, to find new audience members. So it's great that we were able to find somebody who's got an audience that's kind of interested. And while I don't expect to see the Berserk style numbers on your video about us, it seems like the video consistently gains, 2,000 to 3,000 views per day. So, I mean,
Yeah.
and it's still going. So I'm in there. I'm trying to respond to comments or questions if people have them. I plan to continue to do that. Hopefully it's not a big deal. Yeah, I mean, if you got nothing else for me, I will let you guys go and have a lovely evening.
Yep. I think that'll pretty much do it because at this point I'm gonna segue into adding in the ramble section. But yeah, thank you very much for showing up. It was actually really cool to sit down and talk and kind of get this new perspective on the series, and hopefully this will get people to kind of take a look at it or kind of view it with a new lens, or understand that like, hey, this is a very human project made by guys who genuinely care. It's not just some corpo thing, I guess the best way to put it.
Yeah, it's definitely not a corpo project.
Yeah. But yeah, thank you very much for coming back, coming on. Really, really cool. So I guess at this point, we're gonna call it here. So see ya.
Okay, take care, man. Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right. So that was the Q&A part. Now here's us rambling for like an hour and a half.
People who make a living talking about content, well, they need to talk about content that people are interested in. So more often than not, creators are incentivized to talk about things that people already know. Like in tabletop, right? So many content creators, like half their channel is complaining about Games Workshop and how there's no alternatives. But they never talk about the alternatives because nobody would tune in for that. They just want to hear people bitch about Games Workshop.
Yeah, it's 40K BattleTech D&D. That's it.
Yeah, no, it's a little wild, honestly. And it's funny, like BattleTech, I hadn't looked at BattleTech like, so I'm kind of on the older side for this world. And I remember BattleTech when I was like 10 or 11 when it first came out, and it was at the time it was just like a cool way to play with robots from like Japanese anime. That was the entire allure to it. And it kind of died. It hadn't been around for a long time, and now it's come back. And the community that's into this game with what's really like worse lore than even Robotech is just like some of the most like virulent, like psychotic people. I mean, I watch it from afar, and it's like watching a house burn, and like everybody inside is fighting about the house on fire, but no one will put the fire out.
Yeah,
It's wild.
It's crazy, especially with the fact that like. I know a lot of these tabletops have very in-depth lore that can go really deep into their worlds. I mean, God, how many different 40K books exist? That kind of thing.
A lot.
Yeah. And it's always funny because, like, whenever I play tabletop with people, a lot of them just homebrewed everything. They didn't really care about lore. They wanted to write something themselves. So the psychotic loyalty to it, where people, the obvious joke right now is the wheelchairs and dungeons debate. And it's, it's that whole thing of, like, it's weird to see people like fight to the death over it, considering the fact you can just go to a buddy who's like, yeah, if you do that, I'm going to kill your character.
I don't even know what that is. What our artist actually and my wife are both D&D players. I haven't played D&D since I was like 11 or 12 years old.
Yeah.
And I really enjoyed D&D when I played it. And I tried to play it again later. I used to play it in summer camp. It's super old. But you know, I one of the things trying to play again outside of that group, the first thing that becomes super obvious is, well, you need a really good dungeon master to make Dungeons and Dragons good.
Yeah.
And I was not that person. And nobody I played with outside of that camp. There was only one guy in that group who was a dungeon master, and he was amazing, and he made the game fun. But without him, like even when the rest of us would try to play without him, it was just never good. So I didn't even know that D&D uses minis now. That was a surprise to me.
Yeah, minis, maps, these little things that can like go to the extra mile to kind of immerse people in it. Because I play with a buddy of mine in real life, and yeah, he went as far as that. Him and his fiance, they painted minis. Like she was super into to design the maps. I mean, they're into that, that kind of thing. And a lot of people have a lot of fun with that. And I definitely think the freedom is what allows people to kind of latch onto it, because if you can make an excuse for something happening, it's gonna happen. And maybe that's why people can kind of latch on to something so much and make it part of their, let's be honest, their identity. But there's other cases of like, don't let one franchise take over to the point that you forget about the other stuff.
I don't know if you want to start recording, but I'll say this.
I'm recording now, so don't worry.
Oh, you are? Okay. In my experience, players tend to find a specific thing that they love and stick with it, because it gives them more of an opportunity to master it and get good at it.
Yeah.
Versus jumping from thing to thing to thing. I know that's a tough one with video games. A great example of that would be Cyberpunk 2077. I, like many other people, bought it when it came out. I was very excited to play it. The PC game, I have a pretty good gaming PC, because we can expense this stuff for work.
Yeah.
And I enjoyed the game. I didn't love it, but I enjoyed it. It was not what I was hoping for, and it was not what I was expecting. But whatever. That what my expectations were for that game are probably unrealistic.
Yeah.
It's a fairly linear game, right? Like it basically there's some you can go left and right, but essentially it's like any other game. You're basically walking down a corridor to the end, and that's okay, right?
A lot of RPGs ended up kind of going down that path.
They kind of have to, right? To make a stronger story, it costs so much money to build all those different branches, and the higher the fidelity, well, the more the less you want to invest in building branches that people are never going to see, because how many people are really going to play the game multiple times?
Yeah.
I purchased the expansion, what's it called?
Phantom Liberty.
Phantom Liberty, thank you. I got it, I installed it, and I had a day. I was like, okay, let me sit down and play Cyberpunk. I haven't played it, since it came out. I bought it when it came out. I played it to completion and then walked away from it.
Yeah, and a lot of people get hit with that, where they go through that one playthrough and it's like, all right, I'm done with this for the next 3 years.
Yeah, well, what surprised me when I got back into the game is that it was completely from the bottom up redesigned. Like the entire skill system, all of the upgrades, nothing worked the way that I had originally I remembered it. So I was essentially stepping into a whole new game, and I tried 3 or 4 times to start, and I could just never get comfortable starting in the middle of the game and trying a bunch of different upgrades, because I couldn't remember how to do anything.
Yeah.
So I mean one of the reasons people play FPS games in general is because you don't have to learn a lot to play them, right? Like everything is very intuitive. You move, you look, you interact with things, and you shoot at them. It's pretty much the whole game, right?
You know how the shotgun in Doom works.
Exactly, right? But like Deus Ex, I really loved Deus Ex when it came out, right? Like that was such a different game. And I think I played through Deus Ex twice, if I remember correctly. I know I played the second game twice, because I played the Human Revolution. I played that when it came out, and then I played the director's cut like a year or two later, whenever that came out. But I never the second game in the series, when that came out, I spent so long in the hub world, I forgot what I was even doing, and I just stopped playing the game. I never got past like the first area.
Yeah.
And it was one of those things too, where I tried to play the game the way I think it was intended to be, where you're not just shooting everybody and you're just trying to talk your way through a lot of situations. So I did that, and I got to a satisfactory conclusion with the first guy, and I just didn't feel very satisfied. I'm like, I don't know. Armored Core is definitely more my personality
Yeah,
than going into like have these deep negotiations in a video game world where everything is so dystopian to begin with.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. Less thinking involved, more killing everything in sight.
yeah, well, I mean, like there's the cynic in me says that I don't know if people really would behave that way. If you broke into somebody's office and are sitting there threatening them, are you really going to start negotiating with them about like,
Yeah, there's no speech check to pass there.
yeah, right? Like, like I have the unfortunate or fortunate background of like, so where I came from, I was a .com guy pre 9/11. 9/11 had a huge change in my life. It completely changed everything I was doing after it. I no longer cared really about software development in the way that I had initially been doing or website development. That was all secondary.
Yeah.
I was much more interested in national defense at that point, understandably, right?
Yeah,
I
I
lived
mean
in New York
the
City.
post 9/11 hysteria. I mean, everyone was just constantly thinking about terrorism.
Yeah, I mean, and honestly, pre 9/11, I had an interest in the subject matter. Uh, it was 9/11. The what exactly happened was not expected, but people in the counterterrorism space had been discussing for quite some time that an attack was imminent.
Yeah.
Thinking back to the original Trade Center bombing in like, oh, what was that, 93 or 92?
Yeah, I think it was 93.
97, Courier says. Was it
Okay.
really that late? My God.
Jesus.
I thought it was much earlier because it was. I remember Bill Clinton
Yeah.
was president. I remember it was a big surprise when it happened. Like, um,
Yeah, I thought the same
but
thing. I
but
thought it was like mid 90s because wasn't it right before they caught the Unabomber? That's what I was.
God, I
That's what I was
don't
convinced
remember.
of for a
Oh,
long time.
he's 1993. Okay, we were right.
Okay, yeah, that's what I thought.
Uh, but I mean, after 9/11, I was trying to find a way to make some kind of impact or contribute in some way because um, I had previously attempted to join the Marines, and my boss had basically talked me out of it. Ironically, in like '97, I read Starship Troopers and decided I needed to go serve,
Yeah.
and which is kind of a hilarious story, but it really happened.
Yeah,
And
it's a classic story apparently.
yeah, like, I mean, the book, the book really like fills you with like this fervor to like
Yeah,
contribute.
the oorah, yeah, that kind of thing.
And well, so my boss at the time talked me out of doing it. I was working in a startup, so I was kind of an integral part of that organization. He didn't want to lose me. He convinced me to stick around for a few more years, which ended up being a very smart move for me, because at that point, like a lot of tech companies were starting to have IPOs. People were actually making some real money
Yeah,
and
the IP bubble.
coming out of. Excuse me.
I said the IP bubble, the .com bubble.
Yeah, no, I mean, well, I was at the first .com in New York City, so we did have an IPO. It was a successful moment. It was kind of wild because I went to art school, so my expectation was never to really make more than $50,000 a year in my life,
Yeah.
and that certainly changed being part of that tech boom. But afterwards, I mean, I was trying to find a way to get involved, and after 9/11, the recruiters were like overwhelmed with choices, right? Like they could have the pick of the litter. And I had some medical history stuff that hadn't been an issue in 97 that they basically said, nah, don't even bother. Post 9/11, they're like there's no way they're going to take you, right? So I didn't, and I ended up ironically on like a message board, like back when those were a big thing. I had been invited into a message board through a colleague, and it was mostly real deal special operations guys, and people were trying to figure out how to do stuff, like a lot of logistics problems, like how to get spare parts for Toyotas to Afghanistan, all kind of these wild things, because back then nobody knew how to do anything, right? It
Yeah.
literally was the Wild West. There wasn't any of the regulation that you see now, and I ended up hooking up with these guys who worked for a company called DynCorp, and that was when I started to learn that Armored Core was not as much of a fantasy as I had thought it was. Like there was actually this whole privatized side of special operations and paramilitary operations that was real.
Yeah, yeah. Like the public knew about Blackwater, but nobody really understood how deep that actually went.
Well, at that point, Blackwater didn't even have any contracts. They were literally just a shooting range with a small CQB village.
Yeah.
Like they didn't become a thing till like 03, 04. Basically,
Yeah, it was mainly like invasion of Iraq.
Yeah, and their original contract, believe it or not, was all about trying to find nuclear weapons and weapons of mass destruction. They
Yeah.
were basically the guards for the people who went around, like all of the different scientists from like the Department of Energy and places like that, that were trying to locate nuclear weapons. That was their initial contract.
So like
Everything
UN
else,
guys?
no, there was no well, there was UN people there, but they weren't in charge of looking for the nuclear weapons. It was a U.S. government project.
Oh, okay.
Um, it wouldn't be till years. I mean, all of the other contracts they rolled into were because they had that infrastructure on the ground first, so they didn't have to build it. Right? They were the first ones to have these like teams in country that were mostly. I mean, for the most part, were all special operations guys. Like they had like veteran. Some of them were combat veterans, some of them were not, but it was all special operations dudes. So it was guys highly trained, capable. They didn't have to be spun up. They knew how to. They already knew the language of how to talk to people on radios. They knew how to interface with the government.
Yeah, they've probably been there for years by that point.
I mean, what became initially it was a lot of like people who had been veterans who'd gotten out, and it was just like we have mission, we need people.
Yeah.
So where can you get guys? Because quite frankly, pre 9/11, there weren't a lot of jobs if you got out if you got out of a special operations unit. Like what is your big career? You can't really teach people to shoot because the internet doesn't exist. Like what you make a video cassette and it's distributed by somebody.
Yeah.
I mean, in true story, there were guys who made video cassettes prior to 9/11 that ended up being kind of a big deal in Iraq early on because they were really good shooters. They really knew how to set up operations. They understood how to run an organization that was conducting these kind of missions, whatever they were, security, finding people. They had done this because what else were they doing after they ended their military career, right? Like there's what if there was an assault weapons ban, so most people didn't have like an AR-15. Like
Yeah.
getting a pistol was difficult. I mean, I lived in the Northeast. We used to need to get a permit for every pistol we would buy in the state I lived in at the time. And my first pistol permit took over 6 months to get the permit.
Yeah, yeah, and that kind of insanity from that time period, and yeah, I mean you have these guys who they specifically want to join like special operations, special forces, that kind of thing, where it's like they're not just a guy doing their 4 years and then getting out. Like these are dudes who are dedicating to it. So what the hell are they supposed to do once they're done? It's like where do you go?
Well, yeah, and that was a real question back then because the sort of national defense industry, like your Boeing, your Lockheed Martin, things like that, they're very focused on aerospace. They're focused on building things, and it was most of the actual government service providers. If you were going to provide security, it was like, oh, we're going to do a humanitarian mission. So we have doctors or relief workers or whatever it is, right? Like we're trying to move medicine into a country. Well, we don't have a unit that's trained to do that really. Like we don't have the American military is not trained primarily to be a support asset. They're like you take a group like Ranger Battalion or something, like they're trained to go in and storm an airfield or seize a bridge or seize part of a city. Like their specialty is not protecting doctors.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
a very different mission, right? So the people who had that background was kind of a very limited group of dudes. And they transitioned, and again, because Blackwater was there, they could keep bringing people in. They could keep building infrastructure on top of infrastructure, so they could spin things up much faster than everybody else. And other companies there was a bunch of back then, there were a bunch of companies that stood up, and they would just try to get anybody they could to try and fill a contract, and they weren't getting quality people, and terrible things would happen because they were putting untrained people or people not qualified to conduct some of these high threat protection missions they were doing. They were putting them on the ground in really dangerous situations with little or no support. They didn't have air assets. I mean, there was a point in Iraq where the U.S. Army would call Blackwater before it would call its own air assets because Blackwater had less red tape to dispatch helicopters to go rescue somebody or do an overwatch or something.
Jesus.
Well, again, the U.S. Army has always been, and the U.S. military in general has been so successful in the past because it's a very initiative-driven organization. It's a very bottom-up organization, and in the past, you have 30 years between Vietnam. Or 40 years, I guess 30 years between Vietnam and 9/11, really. I guess 1970, yeah, 30 years.
About 35 years, yeah.
Yeah, so the leadership like the peacetime army became a very bureaucratic thing, and it wasn't very agile, and it wasn't really responsive to problems. I mean, even now, like, defense industry, if you think about building a technology or building a capability, you're typically looking at 10 to 20 years to build something and get it fielded, especially if you're trying to make it isolated from foreign influence, whether it's components or labor or raw materials. It's very difficult to do these things. You think about like the F-35 strike fighter, that took like 30 or 40 years for them to make it. And part of the reason it took so long for them to make it is all the different people who were working on the different components were completely isolated from the other people making the other components. It was built in such absolute secrecy. There were so many new technologies built for this single aircraft that, I mean, now it exists. It's a very expensive airplane, but its capabilities are almost science fiction level compared to anybody else's air power. And
that's a very common story. I mean, I know the movies just came out, Oppenheimer, about the atomic bomb, and they made it a point of like nobody involved was allowed to know what they were really doing, and like I know there was like some facility in like Tennessee or something that was supposed to be helping build one of the prototypes, and they had no idea what the hell was going on. If I remember right, they thought they were building like a nuclear reactor or something, that kind of thing. So that is an interesting aspect that a lot of people they know about it, but they don't really understand kind of the mentality of actually trying to work with that is of like, yeah, you're not allowed to know what you're not allowed to know what you're doing, but that means that you're not allowed to know what you're doing. So everything you do is an educated guess at best.
Well, it's producing very specific things in a vacuum, and it's not a skill that a lot of people have. I mean, it's a necessary thing when you're building something that complex, though, right? And there's very few companies on the world. There's very few like management or structural, in terms of organizational structures, that can even facilitate something like that. You think about some of the things that these companies have built, like the SR-71. I'm talking a lot about aircraft. I'm actually not much of an aircraft guy, but again, just more to illustrate the point of what the military industrial complex is good at is making things. They're good at building things to address problems. They're not good at sending people to handle those problems.
Yeah.
That was never something they were great at, because the people who are able to do these things are incredibly smart people, and they tend to work best. They don't necessarily work best in the field. Because the field conditions are complete. It's, we were talking about earlier with even a group chat, being in the field is completely unpredictable.
Yeah. I mean, all the different moving parts, all the different people who have to do different things. Like, I guess a good way to put it is U.S. military is really good at building a bomb, but sending an actual guy to go drop it's another story.
Well, it's a little different. It's almost like the U.S. military is not good at building bombs. What we are good at is training people to go drop them. It's the opposite.
Oh.
We have to go to the private sector to make the things. One of the greatest innovations in small arms in the 20th century really has been the electro-optic. The first quote unquote electro-optic was really fielded at Sante, but it wasn't an electro-optic so much like as a piece of, essentially a very simple piece of equipment that sat on top of a CAR-15 stock, and it was basically a blacked out tube with a single fiber optic line in it. And what it allowed you to do was to take shots with essentially both eyes open, because your left eye, if you're right eye, your left eye would see the target and your right eye would superimpose the dot over it. Which is basically how modern aim points and EOTechs and all these different technologies work, right? And we advanced that to figuring out how to adapt things like variable power scopes or even fixed prism scopes onto carbines and rifles. And like at the first Battle of Fallujah, the number of headshots the Marines were getting was so off the charts that the Navy was investigating for possible war crimes, because they thought, no way they're getting these many guys in the face, because we don't train guys to shoot people in the face. We train them to shoot them in the sort of thoracic cavity where all the good stuff is, because that's it's a predictable shot, and all of the good stuff in the human body is there. Like, you put holes in that, the body stops working quickly. But in Fallujah, because they didn't have that, they were just popping dudes in the face, and they were getting them with ACOGs, which is basically a 4 times magnified optic, maybe not the best optic in the universe, but an incredibly durable piece of equipment, and it enabled those guys to just like kill Al-Qaeda guys like it was going out of style.
Yeah, that's still like some of the worst urban combat in American military history.
Fallujah was pretty insane. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, Fallujah. I mean, and if you think about that, Mosul was far worse when the Iraqis went to retake Mosul from ISIS.
Yeah.
Um, but like none of that even compares to what's happening in Ukraine, right? Ukraine is what happens when people who actually don't care about civilian casualties start fighting in cities.
Yeah, Eastern Europe, very, very colorful region in all the worst ways.
I mean, it's funny, like I actually didn't know about your channel prior to you doing the video about us, and I spent quite a bit of time with your Berserk video, the 21-hour one. Um, I'm a huge anime guy. Like, I actually got into art specifically because of anime. Like, the first anime I ever saw when I was a little kid was Space Cruiser Yamato. I was like 5 years old or 6 years old when that was on television in America. It was called Star Blazers,
Yeah, and that's a
and
classic.
I fell in love with that show. I used to buy the Japanese books and just draw the ships and stuff from them over and over. I became obsessed with anime art style. So Berserk is something I absolutely loved. I mean, I actually got my start. The first comics I ever bought was the U.S. adaptation of Macross before it was called Robotech. Because originally, when Harmony Gold got Macross and Mospita and Southern Cross, they were gonna distribute them as three unique shows, but the I guess the syndication didn't work, so they ended up bundling it into Robotech.
Yeah, it was a whole weird ass like rabbit hole of them trying to splice different series together.
Yeah, I mean, it was a practical thing. I don't think
Yeah.
I can't go back in time and read what that guy's mind was, but he was responsible for getting that stuff over here when nobody else could.
Yeah, it made people
And
aware of it.
yeah, I mean, Macross was amazing, and I really loved Mospita too. I'm not a Southern Cross guy, but Area 88 was the original show, the original manga that I read. I remember Area 88, and it's literally a book about a mercenary air force in a Middle Eastern country called Osran, where the government, which is there's basically two governments, a sort of religious conservative government that's siding with the West, and then the opponent force, which is I'm not sure if they're ever established if they're communists or really or also Salafist, but they're essentially sided with the Russians. And the whole book is just about this, like how the main characters get worn down over the years into by fight. Like why are they? Most of them are war veterans except for the main character, and the war veterans keep. Why do they go back to fight another war when it's not even their war? Because they can't stand that. Like civilian life is meaningless, right? Like the original First Blood movie has one of the best. My wife had never seen it up until a couple months ago, and we watched it. I got the 4K when it came out, and the ending like really hit her heart, especially because of the relationships that we have with so many different special operations veterans. And the stuff at the end of Rambo is very familiar, right? Like it's very familiar to guys that we've worked with who are like, okay, I had this incredible career. I
Yeah.
hunted the worst people in the world. I was responsible. I led an army overseas and I killed evil people. And here I can't get a job at a gas station.
Yeah, can't
Like
even get a
what
job
am I
parking
supposed
cars.
to do with my Yeah, so and Area 88 did a great job of sort of capturing like what happens to people who are at that level, whether they're addicted to like fighting or they're just looking for a purpose or whatever it is. I mean, I loved Area 88. I mean, and that was like my sort of gateway into like manga in general because I picked up all the old Eclipse Viz comics when they came out in I guess it was the 80s. And yeah, like I remember like Digital Target Gray was another one. Gray was a great book by an artist named Tagami. Venusaurus was another favorite of mine. But so much of my work actually is influenced by those old manga and some of the older Gundam anime where they were playing it a little bit more straight. It wasn't quite as fantastical as the new stuff. And Berserk, the first time I read Berserk, God, I think it was like 95, 94, something like that. I was actually in Japan with my band at the time, and we got to do a tour in Japan in that year. It was kind of cool. And one of the first things I was doing was going to all the different manga shops and bookstores, and I remember picking up a copy because I hadn't seen it before. I didn't know what it was. And I just remember how violent the art was. I'm like, what is this? This is so
Yeah.
insane. And I mean, I don't remember when Dark Horse started bringing them out in America, but I was so excited to get those books when they came out. I mean, I was really into Berserk. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
I think Dark Horse started bringing them over in like 2000s because
is it that late?
I think so because like Berserk 97 is how a lot of people started, but a lot of people weren't there to watch Berserk 97 as it was coming out. that is something to look into. I genuinely don't know when it started. But yeah, I could definitely tell, like, especially with Yemen, the black and white arc you did. And I say you, but you know what I mean. Yeah, the whole thing.
Yeah. Our team.
Yeah, the team. I could definitely tell there was a little bit of anime influence there, just with how fights were paced, how panels were laid out. There was definitely that kind of not quite old school manga like 70s, but definitely like there's something here. There's a little bit of rice mixed in. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, Josh, the artist, is he's like art and comics from all sort of eras and all different cultures. I haven't I liked a lot of indie books when I was growing up. I didn't like Marvel books. I think the only Marvel books I ever really read were the Nam and Strike Force Moritari,
Yeah.
which were very different Marvel books. But I liked a lot of European stuff. I love the Japanese stuff, obviously. But Josh and I, when we started working on the original comics, we were looking at things like Blade of the Immortal. We were looking at that and saying we don't want to make something that's just a small face and tons of word balloons. We want to actually illustrate the story. We want to have that more. I mean, it's not really Japanese specifically, but like that manga vibe where they
Yeah.
really are showing what's happening, right? Like Akira and Appleseed were huge books for me and Josh, and I still remember when they even came out in America. Like looking at those books, the level of detail in the art was so off the charts. Like Akira specifically was just
Oh
out
yeah.
of this world. Yeah, I mean, like I love Appleseed. Don't get me wrong. In fact, I like Appleseed better than Ghost in the Shell. But my God, the artwork in Akira is just amazing. Like everything that Otomo did, the technical skill and like the character of his line work and his panel work is amazing. There's so many, and it's crazy. There's so many books he's done that have just never come to America.
Yeah,
Um,
it is especially weird, like how famous Akira got. Not just the manga, the movie. I mean, they teach the movie in animation schools.
yeah. I mean, and honestly, it's so many of the people who worked on that movie were like the greats of Japanese animation. The same thing with like Wings of Oniamis. You look at Wings of Oniamis, and what a beautiful animated film. Just like all of the character and the line work and the people and the story. It's funny. I hadn't actually seen Oniamis in like 10 or 15 years, and it came out on 4K a couple of years ago. I picked it up and I invited some of my kids' friends over to watch it because I was like, "Oh, this is such an epic of Japanese animation." I completely forgot about the rape scene in the near the end of the movie, and I was like, "Oh God, I can't believe I invited a bunch of like high school kids
Yeah.
to watch the friggin' movie with me, and it's got this awful scene in it." And I was like, not my greatest moment as the adult influencer,
Yeah.
you know.
It's like whipping out Perfect Blue at a Christmas party. It's like, oh boy.
Woo! Yeah, I mean, Perfect Blue is another incredible Perfect Blue is another incredible story. I was actually in Japan when Perfect Blue came out. I was at a point in my life when like I think that was the late '90s when those film like there was a bunch of films coming out like Spriggan, and I was basically spending all my money. I'd save all my money. I wouldn't spend my money on anything, and I would just go to Japan 2 or 3 times a year and like just binge on like stuff there. And I would go over for movie premieres. So I saw like the Evangelion films in the theater. I saw Perfect Blue in the theater, and I actually I became friends with Satoshi Kon because I used to write to him. I just found his blog in Japanese and I just took a shot and I wrote to him in my awful broken Japanese with a little bit of English. And like I ended up building a friendship with this guy. I was very friendly with him for a number of years. He was a really incredible guy. And I remember when I found out he was dying of cancer, he didn't tell anybody. So literally nobody knew that he was in such a bad state. And I literally found out on an email from a friend right before the news broke, and it was like, shit.
Yeah. There's that gut punch of like, oh my God, this guy who, so much talent, so much influence, and like built a legacy, just gone.
Yeah, no, it's tragedy. I mean, there was when we were actually working on a Black Padareth anime for a couple of years, um, which COVID unfortunately ended. I mean, the whole story is we started working with a producer in Japan in 2018, work, with the Yemen series. We brought the Yemen series. We met with Netflix Japan. We did a whole presentation on what we wanted to do for a soft reboot, which was going to be the new series Obari. And we came to them with a script. We did a storyboard of it, and they looked at the whole thing, and they basically decided the story was too complicated. Because it was more of a counterinsurgency story versus what we ended up going with, and they said they needed an easier story for people to understand because, like any true counterinsurgency story, just like Zeta Gundam, like people keep switching sides. People might be wearing the same uniforms, and the names are weird. And if you don't know what somebody like if you can't visually I separate a character from another character quickly, you're not, especially with Arabic names, it's very difficult for most audiences to figure out what's going on. So we actually scrapped that entire series in 2019, rewrote the entire thing, which is the Obari arc that you're reading now, and delivered that to them in February 2020. We had sat down with a studio in Japan who was going to be doing the animation. We had the adaptation team in Japan because we were going to basically be involved with like a westernized version of the thing, but the Japanese version was going to be done by an entirely Japanese team. So we were going to only have, I wanted it to only be in English, but they wanted to do a Japanese version too. But anyway, we had the gentleman's name was Takadera. Takadera had been Otomo's second on Akira. He was the head of Otomo's studio, and Mr. Takadera was super excited to work on our project, and he died 6 months after we left Japan in February 2020.
Oh, fuck.
He didn't get killed by COVID. I think he had a heart attack, is how it was explained to me. But it was another one of those things where it's like, Jesus Christ, this production, man.
Yeah.
We spent so much money invested in the relationships, going over there, building the team, and we had the deal in hand basically, and
just bad
COVID
luck.
shut Japan down for over a year. The animation industry still hasn't fully recovered.
Yeah. A lot of
And
places still haven't. Yeah.
Well, you especially see it in their production work. Like if you look at most new anime, it's mostly 3D now.
Yeah.
They're not doing hand-drawn stuff because they're still catching up with contractual obligations to keep their studios open.
Yeah. I mean, just I can imagine that industry, especially with how, I'm trying to find the right word for it, but like it's already a very stressful job, and there's already a lot of stories of animation teams having to go on like 16-hour nights just to be able to get done with certain things. So I can imagine COVID only making that worse.
Yeah, I mean, Japan literally shut down. There was no work being done for months.
Yeah,
because some of that stuff, Japan people's apartments are much smaller than an average American apartment. They don't have the space in the apartment to literally do the work.
Yeah.
There was what's that director's name? I think is Motoko Shinkani, the guy who directed Voice from a Distant Star.
I think so.
He did.
I think so.
There was another one. He did something centimeters per second, and then he did the Your Name movie most recently.
Yeah, Makoto Shinkai.
Yes. So he was the first guy to actually do a CG anime production, and he did it by himself. The original Voice of a Distant Star thing. I have the old Comics Wave DVD from when it came out. That won't play on my Blu-ray player because it's Region 1. That little animation that he did was the first time I had seen anybody combine 3D and 2D in a very elegant way in Japan. And once everybody saw what he could do, then everybody else started to try to incorporate it. But the fact is that most people don't have PCs at their houses anymore. Like I was in Japan, I used to try to go every year. The last time I was there was 6-7 months ago. 80% of the people I know there don't even have a home computer anymore.
Yeah, I know the internet cafe industry is still holding very strong over in Japan, which is weird to think about because, in the West, we mainly just like, well, just buy like a cheap little laptop, buy like a little desktop. What are you doing, Just completely different mindset.
Yeah, well, they do most of their interactive, most of their online stuff is on their phone.
Yeah,
like almost everything is mobile. Like I know a few people who have like things like iPads, but for the most part, their computers have switched to phones and they got the space because unless you're a PC gamer, there's nothing you can't do on your phone that you used to be able to do on the desktop, right? I mean, you can see things a little bit bigger, but that's not the primary consideration. Yeah, I mean, like people still buy discs over there. They have Netflix. You know, Netflix is built into most televisions. So if you want to stream something, you just watch it on TV. You know, you don't if you want to see it big, you don't have to have a PC. And PC gaming, while it's getting bigger in Japan, is still like a fraction of like the other gaming. In fact, it is my understanding now that cell phone gaming has actually significantly depreciated the possibility of being successful with a console game. It's why you're seeing less and less content come out of Japan in terms of like a AAA quality piece. You know?
Yeah,
There was,
it's mainly the gotcha boom now. Stuff like Fate
yeah,
Go and Blue Archive, that kind of thing.
yeah, right. Exactly. Like there was I remember when the Dreamcast came out, there was a new incredible Capcom game landing every 60 days to 90 days. I don't even I don't know I think the last time I played a Capcom game was maybe Resident Evil 7, or I never played 8, but I think it might have been Resident Evil 7. I don't even know what else that company does anymore. You know?
Mainly remaking Resident Evil right now.
Oh, okay, because I mean I think about the same thing with like Konami. Like Konami literally shut down their entire console division at a certain point because they're like, we're not making money doing this, right? Like the IP is good, but we're not able to really capitalize on it. We're not spending like $100 million to make a game that only makes like $200 million. That's not a good investment, especially when they're looking at things like pachinko or gambling or cell phone games, right? Yeah, there seems to be I mean I don't know I don't know what the future holds for these companies because they're giant companies, right? They have like offices all over Japan, they have offices in America, but like is there even an audience for this stuff anymore? Like my understanding is that the PS5 is the best selling game console that Sony has ever made in terms of how fast it was adopted and the propagation of product. I still don't have one. And like I used to be a day one console guy. I used to have like when PS4 came out, I had one the day it came out. PS3 was the same thing. And I don't know anybody who's got a PS5 actually.
I got one, but it took me a long time to get one just because I never bothered with it, you know?
Are they accessible now? Because I remember the big disincentive was initially you're fighting the scalpers.
Yeah, they solved the scalper issue now, but it's the fact that like people who are already on the fence are all waiting on the same thing, and it was one of the reasons I also waited so long. It's like as soon as I get this, they're gonna announce the PS5 Pro, and I have to get a different one. Like that's kind of a thing where they gimp themselves by making that too normal. Of like you can get the console now, or you can get the upgraded one in like 3 years. You know.
Yeah.
And that also kind of peeved people with the fact that like base PS5 was already getting scalped like crazy. And now they have that worry in the back of their head of like, well, if I get this, are you just going to announce something else?
Yeah. Yeah, it's not an insignificant investment to get into a console. It's like $800 or $900 at this point, right?
Yeah, it's getting crazy.
Well, I mean, the value of money has definitely collapsed in the past, especially 4 years. I know when we were first publishing. I mean, this has been the past 4 years have been a real kick in the balls for a small studio like us because we were growing pretty steadily right up until COVID. And the first year of COVID wasn't bad because people got their COVID money and they continued to spend it. But by 2021, the people had spent their COVID money, and everyone was starting to realize, oh wait, like nothing is getting better. And whatever, all of the hopes, all of the 3 weeks to stop the spread stuff that didn't happen, like that, that like keeping like there's industries that never recovered, like, and printing is one of them. Printing like consolidated so greatly. I mean, we put out our tabletop game in November 2021, and it was a pretty expensive endeavor for us to do that. At this point, versus from 2021 to today, our components cost has actually doubled on most of the components for our game, like literally 100% more than we were paying back then.
Wow.
For us to make a book, like we did our first collected edition pre-COVID, and it was like a 400-page book.
Wow.
It cost we sold it. I think we were selling it. That was a Yemen collected edition. We did 300 copies. I think we sold them out in a year, and I think they were like $100 each. It was a really nice package. It came with a slipcase, dust jacket, leather bound book, like or a cloth bound book. It was a very nice presentation. When we did when we did the same thing for the collected edition 3 years later, 4 years later, I think it was 3 years later, the price had more than doubled. Like we sell those collected editions now for over $200 a pop. We're finally down to the last, I think, 10 copies here, or 9 copies, whatever we're down to. Um, I mean, it's such a huge ask for people to spend that much money on a book, but that was the only way we could deliver the quality we had already been doing. Like we
Yeah,
didn't want
yeah.
to cut orders on stuff.
You already had the cost and you had to make that back. Yeah.
Well, the main thing was it wasn't even that we had invested the cost at that point. It was just that we had already promised people we were moving forward. I mean, costs went up so fast like in 2022 that from the time we got a quote on the books to the time we went to the printer was about 2 months because we tried to do a pre-order to offset a bunch of the cost. The price had gone up 30% in the 3 months or the 2 months it took us to open the pre-order and close the pre-order.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, so for us now, like we have the books, the Hypernotes, and thanks to your video, we've gotten a bunch of new fans, and people have been asking, are you going to reprint the Hypernotes? It's like we couldn't do it. The first Hypernotes came out in 2019. We were able to sell those for $40 a copy. Pretty good deal.
Yeah.
Like a 100-page hardcover book, full color art, beautiful printing, awesome. Hypernotes Scorch came out in 2021, and the price was $85 a copy when we were selling it, and we made less money per unit than on the original book.
Yeah, it is a sad state of like, you have indie companies that are trying to get off the ground and do things and then kind of prop themselves up and be like, hey, we're alternatives to stuff that you may be getting tired of or things like that, and just the reality of it and just the actual like day-to-day workings of just being able to go to the print company to have it even physically made can start creeping up on you and getting harder and harder to do.
Yeah, I think that's true for everyone. I mean, there's a new Games Workshop has a new Necromunda coming out this week, and I was watching some reviews of it because I enjoy Necromunda, and the new game looks really cool to me. And they announced the price point for it at $180, and I was like, man, how the hell did they do a Necromunda game for $180? Well, they completely cut the cost. They cut every corner possible. The cardboard is thinner. The components are cheaper. The box is significantly less durable. Even GW, who's in my mind, I associate their name with quality. I don't associate them with being overpriced. I feel like their prices are honestly pretty fair, given what it costs to make what they do. And yes, they are making money, but they have to make money. They're a company.
Yeah.
And they're supporting hundreds of people, right? Like they have to make a certain amount of money every month to make sure they are not laying people off, right? Like I met, I think his name was Corvus Belli. He's the designer of Infinity was it a year ago? Last year at Nova. And he was telling me we were on a game design panel together, and we were talking about one of the most difficult things as a game designer is to keep the lights on. Because like for his company, he's big enough that he needs to put out a release every 30 days and it needs to sell a certain number of units or he would have to start firing people.
Yeah. When you get as big as Games Workshop, a lot of people have that kind of misconception of like, well, they probably have like a Scrooge McDuck vault full of gold coins they can pull from when times are tough. It's like, nah, a lot of those companies, especially when they get big, they can have very thin profit margins where it's like, not only do they have a very loyal fan base, but they have to keep that fan base loyal time and time and time again at a pace to where they're going to keep coming back, not get exhausted, but also not forget about you. Like I can't imagine being in charge of that company.
Yeah, no, I mean, Games Workshop is kind of an incredible thing, and when you consider the fact that they are who they are because they were the first ones in the scene. I remember in the 80s, the very first time I saw a 40K book, I saw Rogue Trader at a store. And there was literally one store in the state I lived in at the time where you could buy Warhammer 40K. One store. And like I remember buying some of the little metal models, and I thought they were the coolest things ever. Like I thought they were the best. When Space Hulk came out, I completely like lost my mind. I was like, oh my god, this is the greatest game ever made. And I mean, if you look at Black Powder Red Earth, what we actually delivered in our game, it's very much a Space Hulk style box where it is all the components you need to play, components to make your own missions if you want to. It's got enough models to make like a good fighting force. It gives you everything you need. It's not like Core 40K now where you buy a starter box and that's the first stage. Right now you have to go out and buy vehicles. You have to buy other forces. You're literally building armies, which costs hundreds of dollars and then hundreds of hours to paint everything.
Yeah. My poor brother, he plays Imperial Guard, so he feels that. Yeah.
Oh my God, I love the Guard. True story. The whole we have been using Legos to do a lot of our prototyping for some of like the computer game you mentioned. We prototyped that game in Legos, and it worked. I stole seamlessly stole that from the Kojima team when they did the first Metal Gear Solid game that way, and it worked so well. Like it worked better than anything I'd ever done before when we started doing that. And we had an employee who worked for us in like the 2006 2009 timeframe. Lived in England. Well, he got a job with Games Workshop, and I think it was like 2000, I don't know, 14 or 15, something like that. We were working on that first game, the prototype for the game that you played, the computer game, and he sent me a copy of Shadow War Armageddon. He's like, "You got to check this out. This is what we're doing here now." And I'm like, "Oh, this is so cool." It's like it doesn't have all the factions. It's just Imperial Guard and Space Marine scouts versus orcs. And the scenarios are cool, and the battle space is small, and and it plays a lot like Necromunda. Like I love that game so much. I mean, and like you mentioned earlier, like yeah, we did our house rules. We got rid of a lot of stuff that we thought was like, for lack of a better word, like a lot of the fat that they put into their game. So you're constantly rolling more and more dice.
Yeah, the ancillary systems.
Yeah, well, people love rolling dice. We like with the people I play with, we tend to like more decisive games, like faster paced. And but yeah, we loved Shadow War Armageddon, and Shadow War Armageddon was what convinced us to. We were working on after we finished the work on the prototype for the computer game. We started developing the computer game. And we, of course, immediately started work on what was going to be the next game after that. And originally, that was going to be another PvE style experience. And playing Shadow War Armageddon convinced us we should do a PvP experience. And I mean, originally, we were actually supposed to be doing this game with Spectre Miniatures, who is a British company. They were one of the first peoples in the modern miniature wargaming space. And they had licensed some of the units from the Yemen series, and they put out some models for their game, which was Spectre Operations, which is like tactical RPG for lack of a better word. And so the idea of us coming out with a game that was going to be a PvE game would build onto what they were doing. But when we shifted our development to a PvP game, they felt like it would compete with their rules and their models for them to make something based on what we were doing, because in the video, I know you mentioned you hadn't played the game, but our game is a very class-based game. It actually works like a real army unit. Like it's structured. The game is actually set up with classes that work like actual roles in a NATO fire team, right? Like Western okay. Combat in general, and then your OPFOR. We now have a NATO style faction there as well. But the core game was asymmetric. You had like local fighters, guys with suicide vests, all this different stuff. And one of the big ideas in that game is that, okay, moving forward, drones are going to be they're going to become an organic part of a fire team and a squad. So you're never going to have to it's not going to be like artillery or airstrikes where you have to call somebody else. Like you can direct that strike personally, right? There's going to be a guy in your squad that you can point to that guy and say, kill that man. And the guy's like, Roger that, and sends it. Which ended up happening in Ukraine pretty quickly. And ultimately, I'm jumping around a little bit, so I apologize. But basically, that's actually what led us to get some of the attention of actually like professional war gamers, for lack of a better word. And a couple weeks ago, we were in the U.S. Army War College speaking about our game, speaking about the abstraction and how we came up with it and why it works the way that it does. Because I think we are the first miniature war game to be invited to speak at what they call the Connections Wargaming Conference, which is a conference purely for professional war games, i.e. games that are used not just for entertainment, but for professional development. Okay. The whole different, the way that we approached our game was so different than what they had seen prior to our game, that I guess like, because we started dealing with like the temporal aspects of the game as well, like compressing, like how do you break time up into different slivers so you can actually have a turn-based game that allows you to have tactical decision making versus just like using most games. I don't think this is a big controversy to say, but I feel like most games are essentially an extrapolation of the You-Go-I-Go system. They're basically 40K. Yeah, our game used an alternating activation. in alternating activation, like once we figured out to do that, and once we figured out how to break up some of the different aspects of time when you're actually fighting people, our game plays like no other game out there, which is again why we started to make it we wanted to make it a PvE game, because we felt like PvE was going to draw more people into the IP, and that led us to basically separate from Spectre and then develop our own line of minis, which ended up taking over a year and a half to find somebody to even do the sculpts.
Oof, yeah.
Well, it's not a very common thing, and most people don't know how to do it. So the guy we found actually had never done any kind of modern conflict game before, but he had a huge backstory. Like he now has his own company, but like at the time he was basically just a contractor, and he would work for mostly doing fantasy games. So when we were setting up all the stuff for our models, we would literally put on all the equipment and take photos for him, because we had all the equipment for the day jobs, which was, and I'm circling back to this now. The Echelon as a company has survived not on computer games and comic books. That's been a part of our income, but really where we've made most of our money is marketing and relations for like small arms and like professional development for special operations forces. So okay. I was a founder of a company. I was one of the founders of the company Magpul Dynamics. I left Magpul Dynamics in 2010 with one of my friends, Travis Haley. We formed a company called Haley Strategic, and I worked there for almost 6 or 7 years. And all we did was develop training systems for individuals, and basically from like one man up to a squad. That was like our entire focus. And Travis was a former Force Recon Marine, so I had a lot of experience working with him. I started to work with different companies making enablers for special forces, special operations forces. From there, I ended up leaving to work on Black Powder Red Earth, because HSP became such a full-time job. I never even had the opportunity. I was like basically doing only that, and I stopped working on BPRE. I left that job. I started working on BPRE full-time again. And then we started working for a company called Bravo Company Manufacturing, and then another company called Northern Red. And in the course of doing those working with those companies, I got to really see how you would set up training at a platoon level, and how do you equip guys, and what are the important factors that go into training. I mean, I'd already seen some of that earlier on, right? Like at an individual level, you're focused on individual mechanics, but as a squad leader or a platoon leader, you're not really focused on that. And that's you see that reflected in our games, where we don't bother with things like ammunition management or reloads or minutia.
Yeah.
My experience is that those things are put in place by people who don't understand what they're trying to depict. So they're trying to find things that they can understand and make them matter far more than they do. And one of the examples, when I'm at game shows, I love to do this. Game shows are typically kind of convoluted places. Like I can point like an aisle over, and I'm pointing through a crowd of people and a bunch of stuff. And, most guys who buy our game, I can like point to a guy and be like, hey, could you shoot that guy right now? Yeah, absolutely. I'm like, how far would you say he is? I don't know, 25, 30 yards, right? Yeah. I'm like, yeah, I could absolutely do that. It shouldn't be hard, right? And they're like, oh yeah, okay, I get it. Like, you don't need a morale check, right? Like if he started shooting at you, are you gonna drop your shit and run, or are you gonna stand and fight? He's like, well, I'm gonna fight, right? Like I might move to a better position to start engaging, but yeah, I'm immediately beginning my attack. And it's like, okay, cool. This is like somebody once told me that he was telling me about like an army, a small army. He was basically leaving Afghanistan, and they were hunting the Taliban and Al Qaeda and the Haqqani network. And none of his dudes could read. They literally couldn't read. So, like, most of his guys had weapon systems that were not even what we call zeroed, i.e., like if you use an optic and you point it at something, well, the bullet is going to kind of go where that reticle is, where your little crosshairs are. Most of his guys did, none of their guns were prepared, but like it was all about getting guys to move to the positions and be synchronized, so that when they arrived, they were able to begin attacking whatever they were trying to attack from two sides. And that's how you won every battle. He was winning battle after battle with dudes who literally didn't even know how to, they didn't know how to reload. But the reality was that didn't matter, because in like all these battles they were having, they never really got to. Yeah, well, they never got to a point where even guys even had to reload half the time. Like I did one of the groups I worked with, they were like interviewing their own dudes to try to figure out which skills they really needed to focus on, and they determined, with two exceptions between like 2010 and 2020, there had been 0 battles where anybody actually shot a weapon to bolt lock. i.e. They shot the magazine out, they shot that many rounds. It just doesn't happen, right? Like guys, in other games they'll have things like morale checks. It's like you can watch videos in Ukraine of penal battalions running into machine guns and they don't break and run.
Yeah, just once it's in muscle memory, once it's in instinct, it's very hard to kind of snap people out of that. It would take something extreme, or that guy should have never been anywhere near that place in the first place.
I think it's even an even deeper thing, because there is a like even at that level, there's some sort of camaraderie where like the idea of abandoning your brothers, the people that you're with, fighting and dying with, is unthinkable.
Yeah,
that
would be worse than getting shot.
Yeah, right. Like that's literally something we used to talk about in some of the training we did. It's like we talk about guys. There was an instance, I believe, in Connecticut of a home invasion where 3 men entered a house. The father was in the living room and his wife and daughter were upstairs. And his first thought was, I hope they don't hurt me, versus like, I need to protect my wife and daughter. Well, his wife and daughter were killed. He managed to survive. And, what does he have to live with every day when he looks in the mirror?
Yeah, that thought, just that singular thought in his head.
Well, if you somebody said this to me once. I was at a trade show, and some dude was getting drunk and he was getting kind of mouthy, and one of the guys I was with, pretty serious individual, made some sort of comment to the effect that was, if I knock his fucking teeth out, he'll never look at himself the same way again, because every day he'll see himself in the mirror and remember the time that he lost control and it cost him his teeth.
Yeah.
Like, it's like a really painful lesson to have to learn. But like sometimes that's how you learn stuff. So if you're gonna and how this all ties back into the game is that there was a mindset that the things that we figured out that you actually have to focus on and work on when you're actually training people and simulating combat or preparing people for combat. Well, there's a certain number of things you have to focus on, and most of these games don't understand it at all, because none of these guys have ever done it. Or if they have that, if they have, it's been at an administrative level. It's never been at an actual like close combat guys, clearing the rooms or assaulting a town level. Those are very different. Those are very different people.
Yeah.
Like really different, like almost unrecognizably, even if they're in the same unit. The personality it takes to like go and do that. And that obviously translates into our books as well. Like, you read Yemen, obviously, and spoiler warning. One of the big things about Yemen was what I was trying to connote is that there's a sort of consciousness of people spread across these multiple characters, right? Like you have the guy who's he's more of the opportunist. You have a guy who's more of like, he's there because he kind of thinks it's right, but he's at the same time he's kind of cynical. He's like, well, I'm working with my friends and we're killing bad people. And then there's the guy who's he's like the sort of id, and he just like hates. And he's so what's the word? He's such a sociopath that like he feels nothing anymore. Like when he kills people, it's like killing insects.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've worked with people like that, and they are truly, if they don't have somebody around them, especially when they were younger, before they developed like the personal maturity to control themselves better, like if they didn't have like adult supervision, for lack of a better word, if they didn't have the person who was acting as the unit's conscious, you get the scene where like the guy walks up to the camp full of the aspiring jihadis.
Yeah, and just murks them all.
Yeah, and the funny thing is that scene is actually watered down from what I originally wrote, because our artist didn't want to draw it how I wrote it. Because the original scene, it was all teenagers, because that was the reality of what was happening in Yemen at the time, is that most of the jihadists, the most violent and like brutal people, were coming from like Norway, Sweden, and England. And they were Western. They were all like between 15 and like 25, and they were the core of ISIS. When you saw people's heads getting cut off on the internet, when you saw people setting kids on fire, it was those guys.
Jesus.
So when you confronted with those people, I saw it happen with the Iraqis in 2013, before Instagram started to really clamp down on the stuff. But when ISIS was first a thing and they were putting out all their stuff on the internet, I knew some of the ICTF guys at the time, and I was following them on Instagram, and we'd talk. and the stories they were telling me about what they would find when they would liberate a town from ISIS. Like these were hard guys, like hard dudes. Like they had fought Al Qaeda for years. And like I remember the Nation had just written a hit piece on some of them, saying they were like America's new death squads. But these were the dudes who stood and fought when ISIS came through. They didn't run. And I listened to them talk about what they found in towns as they were liberating them from ISIS essentially. And it's almost incomprehensible, I think, if you don't hear them saying it. Like some of that is in the new book. I really am writing the perspective of one guy that I know. He's the character Cobol. He was telling me that like they were weeping, like they were literally weeping with anger because they would walk into a town and they would find literally all the children cut to pieces with axes, and they'd all been raped first, and ISIS videoed all this stuff because they weren't Sunni Muslim. They would just butcher them.
Yeah.
And the ones I mean, like horrible stuff, like stuff that sounds like similar to what the Nazis did when they were like trying to wipe out the Russians. Like if you've ever seen, I think you did a piece in the movie Come and See. What an uncomfortable film, but like
Yeah, I mean,
pretty real.
That's what happened,
Yeah, exactly. And like it was similar to what was happening in Iraq. Well, that's what ISIS was doing. And again, these weren't Arabs. A lot of these guys, they weren't Arabs from the region. They were people coming from Europe who were doing this stuff.
Yeah,
and
never underestimate the malice of a dumbass teenager.
Yeah, and so what the ICTF, the Iraqi Special Forces, would do when they caught these guys, they didn't just kill them. They would like cut them to pieces with saws. They would draw and quarter them, or like stake them down and and let the women who were left come and finish them off. I don't know if you ever saw the movie The Big Red One. There's a couple of great scenes in that movie where where Lee Marvin's squad, they'll kill a bunch of Germans, and then the locals will literally come and like butcher the wounded soldiers because they hate them so much because what the Germans did there.
Yeah, just
and
endless retaliation.
Well, it's a well of pain that you cannot fill.
Yeah.
There's not enough blood to fill it. And
Yeah.
so once you've experienced that level of suffering and hurt, it irrevocably changes you, and it irrevocably changes everyone around you, because no one can experience something like that without I mean, it basically is a shock, right? Like I used to work with a group called Warriors Heart. One of my friends, Tom Spooner's still there. He's a sort of he's a former Delta Force operator. His whole thing is trying to help guys through PTSD. And so much of PTSD, and PTSD can mean so many different things to so many different people. But, again, going back to The Big Red One, a really incredible movie to see as a kid, too, because I saw that when Mark Hamill's in that movie, and he was Luke Skywalker, and I watched him at the beginning of the movie. He's like, I can't murder people. And Lee Marvin is like, we don't murder, we kill.
Yeah.
And it's a great scene. And then at the end of the movie, when they finally get to the death camp, and he sees what he's been fighting against, he has that guy dead to rights.
Yeah, it's just,
and he doesn't just shoot him, right? He empties 8 rounds from a Garand at 3 feet, and he reloads.
Yeah,
and he keeps.
It's almost instinctual, just that kind of you do not belong in this world kind of mentality.
Yeah, well, it's funny because it's very much now could come full circle. It's very much why I like Berserk. Because I think Berserk actually really gets that right. Like, I think Gundam did a great job of it too. Like, I mean, I'll come back to Gundam in a minute. Berserk is so much about a guy who's experienced so much pain and suffering that, like, it is impossible for him to live any other way.
Yeah, it's almost kind of like this is gonna sound really weird, but it's kind of how I see it in my head. It's almost like fairy tale logic. It's like. Because we all know the classic setup's like a horror movie. The kids piss on the old man's grave and he comes back as a ghost and kills them. It's that kind of thing of when you commit a sin that bad, when you do something that malicious to somebody, why would you ever expect any other behavior in return? Like it's that kind of thing where just the universe will make it to where you will get your comeuppance in a way that you would think only belonged in hell. That kind of thing.
I think one of the things that attracts me to Berserk is that there's no justice in it. There's no resolution to it.
Yeah, you get what you get in the form of justice, and that's about as much as you are getting.
Yeah, like his character is never healed. He's never going to get over what happened to him,
No.
and it's a real. I mean, it's obviously a tragedy that the creator passed away, a couple of years ago. I mean, that was really heartbreaking to learn that. And I don't know what they're going to do with. I don't see how they're going to wrap that series up. I don't see that it's going to come to some kind of conclusion. But in some ways, it's kind of better that he never gets a conclusion. Like they never really win. You never know. And there's part of me that thinks that's probably, like, as nihilistic as it is, that's probably like the true ending, because that's actually that feels more real to me. Like the end of Area 88 was a similar thing where, like, the books end a little bit differently than the film, but the end of the film was amazing. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but essentially this main character in Area 88, he's basically been I don't know what the right word is. He's tricked into joining this mercenary air force. He has to serve there for a number of years, and the only way he can complete his contract is to kill a certain number of people or to serve a certain amount of time. So he kills the number of people, and they let him go as the Civil War is going to shit, and he gets out. And he gets out, and he finally makes it back to the woman and the life that he left behind. And he before voicemail. So he's trying to call her all day. He's in Paris. He's trying to get her on the phone. Can't get her on the phone. When he finally gets her on the phone and he hears her voice, he's like, realizes that, like, he's a different person, and that, like, he can't have the happy ending.
Yeah.
And I think that is, I mean, I thought that was one of my favorite things about Gundam also, is that, like, the ultimate story is Amuro Ray believes that people will change if given time. Sean Zabel does not believe in the human spirit.
Yeah. These two philosophies that, like, there's no way on God's green earth they're ever going to come to a compromise. It's just not how they work.
And in the end, they end up destroying each other, right? Yeah. But the thing that was so great about Shao, because I saw Shao Kahn Attack on Laserdisc. I remember when it came out, and I was watching. It's funny, I wasn't not a native Japanese speaker by any stretch of the imagination, but I was watching it in Japanese. And I remember when the ending happened after they die, and, like, all the light spreads across the world, there's this sense of, like, are people seeing this aurora and, like, realizing that, like, they were just saved? Does it have, like, an impact? And I thought that the music did a great job of conveying this, like, as they're showing, like, the baby crying and the people are still living their lives. But at the end, you see the people, the radicals who wanted to overthrow the Earth government. They're still unchanged. All the people are still unchanged. And, like, that, when that, like, those last notes drop and it gets kind of dark at the end, I feel like, oh wow, this is the future of Gundam. It's unchanged. These people gave everything to give people a second chance, and nobody will ever understand.
Yeah, because it's just not in people.
They can't appreciate it. They're so wrapped up in their own lives, they don't realize how close they came to losing everything.
Yeah.
And that's a super powerful message, right? Like, I wish there was storytelling like that today. It's funny, like, one of my favorite shows in the past 20 years that I used to tell people to let their kids watch Pokemon, because I thought the first season of Pokemon was amazing. It's a story of a young kid who leaves home, tries to build this thing and become a champion, and goes through all this suffering and tribulation and work, and he loses.
Yep, at the
He doesn't
very last
actually
second when it
win.
mattered.
And he loses to his friend. And I thought, what an incredible ending. What a great thing for kids to watch. Because he doesn't give up. He just goes back and is like, I'm going to try again. I haven't given up. And I thought, man, this is incredible. Where's storytelling like this for kids now?
Yeah. It can be a cycle, but you can find purpose within the cycle.
Yeah. Well, I mean, isn't that what life is? It's like trying different things. And, like, you're never going to, like, I mean, you've obviously painted a model kit at some point, right? Like, you don't start out good.
Yeah.
You buy your favorite model, you do a terrible job building it, and you're so upset you don't paint it, so you buy the model again, and then the second time you build it, it's better, and you're like, okay, maybe I'll give this a try with painting, and then you ruin the paint job. And you're like, God damn it. So you buy the model again, and maybe the third time the paint job sucks a little bit less, like, you're getting better, and maybe it's like, oh, maybe, let's say it's a Gundam, like, maybe it's time to try an airbrush, or maybe it's time to try a different kind of paint, right? Like, I know the first time I painted a 28 millimeter mini, it was terrible. I was so discouraged. And then I just got some different brushes and I took another whack at it, and I was like, wow, okay. I understand now how the brush is supposed to trace different elements on the model, and I understand how that creates depth and how it creates form that's easier to color with the brush on the next layer. And it's a learning process. Everything in your life is about learning and developing skill and not just accepting defeat, right? Like you're not owed anything by the world. It's up to you to be happy in the world. And I mean, this is a big part of the BPRE community too. Like we have like a zero tolerance in the community for essentially juvenile behavior. Like we have, we even have rules like you can't, if you don't have firsthand knowledge or direct secondhand knowledge of something, please do not discuss it.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
Don't make assertions for things you don't understand. Just because you watched a video about somebody talking about something doesn't mean you should talk about it. It means you should go experience it and come to your own conclusions. And like Berserk, again, not to harp on that, but you obviously Berserk is a big part of your channel.
Oh, yeah.
There's so much to learn in Berserk, and there's so many different layers to it. Like it's not just about a guy who like smashes monsters to pieces, right? It's about a guy who's been smashed to pieces and turned into a monster, and like he's trying to put him back self together through killing, which is ultimately an impossible endeavor, right? Like you don't heal yourself by destroying other people.
Yeah.
And I didn't finish your 21-hour video. I confess, I got to about like 16 hours, and I'm like, yeah, this is why I stopped liking Berserk. When he started meeting the witches and everything started to get nicer, and like there seemed to be more hope. I'm like, what's going on?
Yeah, you missed the black metal days. Yeah.
I mean, I don't believe any story could be all darkness. Like Evangelion was my favorite series for many years. I loved Evangelion.
And even Eva had more than just End of Evangelion.
Of course. No, I mean part of what made Eva great was the story that Shinji was going through, which ultimately ends up being like a circle, but like I mean, Space Cruise Yamato is the same thing. We were talking about Yamato earlier. The first series, the whole show is about the main character trying to avenge his family, right? And like he gets to the end, spoiler, and his brother's not dead yet. And he's like actually alive. But he doesn't want to go back with his brother Kodai because he's fallen in love with this other woman and he's going to stay with her.
Yeah, he has too much at that point.
And they finally destroyed Gamelons, the people who used all these nuclear weapons to contaminate the earth, and they killed hundreds of millions of people, right? They drove the human civilization underground, like they completely irradiated the planet, and they finally destroyed Gamelon. And what does Kodai do? Is he's like, this is what victory is. It's ashes. Like it tastes like ashes. I don't feel anything. I don't feel like the pain isn't gone. Like I didn't avenge anybody.
Yeah,
and I thought that was like really heavy, right? Because the whole show is about duty.
War.
Right? Yeah, exactly, right? Like war is the absolute last result. When you get into it, you need that like you it's very difficult to be anything but brutal, but because you're literally killing people.
Yeah.
You literally have to destroy a part of yourself to do what is necessary. But not everybody is willing to live together, right? Like, I mean, like in Yamato or in Berserk, we never really. I mean, power seems to be the ultimate goal for the one character. In Yamato, the goal was much more about a guy who had the villain had basically he loved his people. They overpolluted and overpopulated their planet till it became uninhabitable. So they were looking for another planet, and they were willing to do anything to get it.
Yeah. In another world, they would have been the main characters of their story, and the characters that you liked in original Yamato would have been seen as the terrible evil resistance force they had to fight off.
I mean, and when you're doing character-driven stuff, I feel like that those kind of epiphanies. I mean, everybody makes different epiphanies in their life if they're not just like submerged in like the internet or whatever, right? Like if you're actually like living your life, you should have like epiphanies quite often because very often you're wrong about things, and when you figure out you're wrong, or you're off azimuth, maybe you're not totally wrong, right? Correcting that is how you become a better person. It's how you reach happiness, right? It's how the ability to have that critical thinking to look at problems and say, okay, I'm not happy where I am. How can I fix this? Or how can I work towards making things better, right? Like one of my big things, one of the big things with BPRE, like all our merch is made in America and sourced in America. Essentially, we had made, I think we had made one or two things in China early on, but once the videos of the camps, the concentration camps over there came out, no more, right? Like
Yeah.
never again, right? Like I worked in Europe before 9/11 very briefly, and being a little bit of a war history guy, I took the European World War II tour, so I actually got to go to like Normandy. I got to go to some of these places, and yeah, I can tell you that like I never want anything to do with like mass murdering women and kids and adults of any group if I can avoid it.
Yeah, it's
Uh,
hard to keep that on your brand, you know.
yeah, it is, and it's also the reason things like a lot of electronics, you know, it makes it very difficult, right? Like we live in a society that requires you to have electronics, right? Like I don't think you could do most things if you don't have some kind of phone or computer, right?
Yeah, at the
And
very least.
at some level, that stuff always touches. It always touches China because there's no way to get a lot of the. I mean, even the raw materials. I mean, there was recently a discovery in Pennsylvania and West Virginia of one of the largest caches or ore stripes of rare earth materials in the world. So, in theory, if the CHIPS Act, if that ends up, you know, bearing fruit, if we start being able to make transistors and microchips in the West, we actually have a resource to completely isolate ourselves to cut China off entirely, which would be amazing if we could divorce ourselves from their economy. But
Yeah.
Americans are so addicted to cheap things that it's and our concept of value, I think, has been warped by the fact that we've been living off of other people's um, slavery for all intents and purposes.
Yeah,
Is
yeah.
you know, it warps your perception of what's value, you know, what things are worth. I was at a comic store the other day. I picked up a couple of copies of Gundam Thunderbolt. The book is printed in America. They had the Shaw's counterattack book, and I was like, oh, cool! I didn't even know this was published in English. So I went to pick it up, but I did what I always do. I checked where it's printed. Printed in China, went right back on the shelf. I'm not buying it.
Yep, you can just find one that was probably printed somewhere else or picked up an omnibus. Like, just take that little bit of extra effort to be like, no, I'd rather not.
Yeah, and quite frankly, I've already seen the movie. I have it on Laserdisc, DVD, and like
Yeah, there you
freaking
go.
4K. I don't really need the manga. It's not going to kill me to not read it. And I mean, like I when I picked up the Berserk, because all the Berserk, the Dark Horse books, the original ones were all printed in I think Canada. Now I think they print a lot of stuff in China now. I tried to pick one of the hardback collected editions because I wanted to give it as a gift to somebody. Actually, after watching your video, I was like, oh, you know what? My wife would love Berserk. She's never read it, and she's into some of these things. Picked up the book, and it doesn't have any origin information on the outside. It's on the inside. So, and it's a shrink wrap book. So I opened the book, and sure enough, printed in China. Son of a bitch. So
Yeah.
she'll get the first one as the deluxe edition, and then she can read my individual manga later. But
Anything just not to have that on your conscience. Yeah.
just I mean, my conscience, and like also like there's a practical thing of like, I mean, we are very clearly in the midst of a global conflict right now.
Yeah.
Right? Like I mean, it's I know a lot of people who don't seem to understand that, but like, yeah, there's been war raging across Africa. There's been war raging across the Middle East. Obviously, we've got Eastern Europe on fire. We've got South America. You know, we've got Russian ships in Cuba. We've got the Chinese military installing itself in various South American countries.
Yeah,
I mean,
Venezuela's
Hamas.
falling apart as we speak.
Yeah, no, like things have really come apart in the past few years on a level that I don't think most people are aware of. And I mean, like here's something. I was talking to a friend of mine who lives in Tahoe, and he's like, John, how screwed are we? And I'm like, well, you know, we've had almost 10% additional population illegally enter this country by all estimates in the past 3.5 years. A good number of those people are sympathetic with groups like Hezbollah and Hamas. You're
Yeah.
in California. How difficult is it going to be for them to set wildfires in your state? You
Yeah.
don't have the infrastructure set. I mean, they don't have. It doesn't have to be dramatic. They don't have to crash planes into buildings.
No, they can
They can
just
just
buy a
have
tank of
fires.
gas now.
Yeah, right. Like so, and that he had not considered that before. He thought he was thinking like big terrorist attack, like, you know, like I don't know, blowing up an oil terminal or something. Yeah, you don't have to do anything that dramatic. It's so easy. The infrastructure in a lot of parts of our country was artificially pushed into directions that was not ready for.
Yeah.
And as a result, that is a very brittle architecture. It's a very brittle infrastructure. So how resilient is it going to be in the face of like a catastrophe? I mean, we've already seen in Texas, they lost, I mean, multiple times now in this year, or the past year or two, they've lost power for like what, 5 to 10 days at a time in parts of the state, which is
Yeah.
kind of unthinkable, right? In a modern Western nation.
Well,
Um,
and hell, you have the what was it, CrowdStrike, that
yeah,
whole thing where you just had like a major data outage that canceled like God knows how many different flights.
yeah, and then think about how that translated into the amount of business. Like I think I heard Delta lost $500 million. Well, think about where all those people were going and all the potential business that was lost.
Yeah, think about the banks that could have been affected, the hospitals. Like it's a thing where something that small and that simple, and no one looks at it because it's that ingrained, and all it takes is one bad day.
I mean, it's like there's the ramifications and second order effects that I mean they trickle out in ways that people don't think about because it doesn't affect them, right? Like our shop, we're a small company, we're 4 people here. So we directly see when something like that happens. We were actually at a big game show, one of the bigger miniature wargaming shows in America. And CrowdStrike happened on Friday when most of the people were traveling to that show. As a result, less than 20% of the people who had registered for the show, who had paid for it, ever made it. Half the damn vendors ran out of product on the second day because they were having additional product shipped in, and they literally had nothing to sell after the first 2 days of the show. They were like out of inventory, nothing was coming through.
Yeah. Stuff like that where people don't realize how important it is until out of nowhere they try to run their debit card, or they're expecting a package and it just never happens.
Yeah, man. I mean, this is sort of slight tangent to that, but there was a trailer released on YouTube the other day. It's a new Taiwanese series called, I think, 0 Hour or 0 Day, and it's all about I guess it's a trailer for a 10 episode miniseries that's coming out in next year, and it's all about the potential of a PLA invasion of Taiwan and what that could potentially look like. And I mean, that's real enough that my friends who are Taiwanese have in the past asked me about their families being able to stay with me, essentially becoming temporary refugees and moving to America if China invades or before China invades.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
Like,
Taiwan especially has been living with that threat for a very long time. They are very aware that it very much can happen.
yeah. And the reality is that, like, the Taiwanese government, like the American government, is not it's not oriented towards one direction. Different people think different things, right? Some people want to reunify with the mainland. Some people do not. Some people want to fight to the death. The reality is that Taiwan will not win. I mean, it said they talk about in the trailer. The reality is that, like, Taiwan will not prevail.
Yeah, I mean, it's just
Like, Ukraine won't prevail either, right? Like, it's just a matter of time. Like, they only have so many people, and the Russians are moving forward. They are gaining territory, not quickly, but hey, man, the Ukrainians are running out of people way faster than the Russians are.
yeah, they've been
It just
relying on basically our money and guns to keep them upwards, but I mean, just Russia just has more bodies.
Yeah, yeah, and they're willing to sacrifice them, right? Like, they're willing to push people and equipment into artillery and machine guns and flatten cities. Like, they're not taking terrain, they're not taking anything of value when they secure territory, right? Like, you can look at satellite photos of the cities that they're as they move through them. There's nothing left.
Yeah,
Like, it's literally just flat. Um, so for me, like, the invasion of Ukraine had a lot more to do with the honestly when it happened. I spent a lot of time thinking about what could be their goal, and ultimately I thought the goal was, after the U.S. had withdrawn from Afghanistan, we had shaken our credibility globally, and if Russia invaded Ukraine and the U.S. didn't come in, which we were never going to come in, right? We don't have a treaty with them,
yeah,
and we weren't going to oppose them really. It would shake the Saudis into basically starting to trade hydrocarbons and things that weren't the U.S. dollar. And unfortunately, that has come to pass.
yeah,
And,
yeah.
and and that is by far it's funny that some of this stuff plays into the very books. It's happening in the background. but I didn't think they were going to come off the petrodollar till a little bit later. But then again, it's taking us so long to finish the books.
Yeah, reality's moving faster than fiction at the moment.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, like I didn't think things were gonna. I didn't think it was possible for things to fall apart as quickly as they did. But you know, I'm also a skeptic. I've spent the past 20 years or so looking at war stuff and thinking about like when we've come through, when we've not come through. Like the American people get bored. They want to win all the time. That's not possible.
Yeah, there's
Right?
a lot of situations where it's more complicated than that.
I mean, any situation is more complicated than that, right? Like my local school board is more complicated than that, right? Like you got two sets of parents in there who think, you know, book A or book B should be taught as curriculum, and they're the same history, just with different things omitted, right? Because they both omit something, right? Nothing is like going to cover everything. So those, you know, those two people will you know, they will think with and have every reason to believe that if their vision is not pushed forward, their kids will be irrevocably damaged. And like that's just something as simple as like a basic history book.
Yeah.
You know, you try now you start talking about national level problems of like, okay, you know, what does it actually mean to the United States that the Saudis that they're accepting Chinese money and Russian money to trade hydrocarbons? I mean, that's a huge deal. That's gonna, the inflationary spiral that we in does not end.
Yeah, because I mean, it's a thing of we've been kind of built to leech off the Saudis for so long that the minute they start kind of playing favors with other people and kind of start shutting us out, I mean, you already had the infamous, very infamous gas shortages in like the 70s, where people had to line up at gas stations just to be able to fill their tanks. Like that still can very much happen, and it's a large part of why a lot of people have been desperate for us to move more towards like nuclear reactors and things like that. So like less of our infrastructure relies on natural gas, and why we've been, why America has really been pushing for like domestic in-house drilling. We're like, listen, if we're going to use this, we need to use it in our land, where we're not buying it from somebody else and shipping it to where we're beholden to their costs and their interests.
I think there's another layer to it you should consider. The other layer to it is being able to export energy. It becomes a function of a global influence, right? Like you are able to influence other people's policy and orient their economies towards yours if you are providing them goods that they require.
Yeah, you become kingmaker.
I mean, like, and you can look at like certain nations after World War II that were radically, like, they became some of the most powerful industrialized nations in the world because of the outcome of that conflict and where we needed them to be. So we obviously provided more capability, more resources, more investment money to help build certain states, right? Like that's a very common thing, right? Like you want an area to be oriented towards you create debt, right? Like that's what the whole point of the World Bank is to essentially put like nations in debt to the West. Yeah. And Russia and China has been basically doing a similar thing over the past 30 or 40 years. I mean, certainly throughout the Cold War, the Russians were much more outward focused than the Chinese, but post George Bush, or even during George Bush, like the Chinese and the Russians have very much I mean, it's especially post like communist Russia, right?
Yeah, or
Soviet Union. The wall. Yeah, they're much more focused now on global expansion, like global influence, right? You see it in Europe like really badly with the Chinese, and certainly in Africa and other parts of the world.
The reality is that a lot of resources into Africa.
Yeah, well, it's because there's a lot of mineral wealth there that is vital to control a global economy that is based on electronics.
Oh yeah. You have all that gold, you have all that lithium. I mean, there's an endless wealth bank. It's just about working with the people to get to it.
Well, so now think about like U.S. domestic energy policy and how we have. It's like why we tried to cut away from manufacturing. Like we created a wall of laws that required manufacturing and sourcing and mining of resources to conform to a certain set of environmental standards and standards for treatment of human beings who are doing the work for those things that we all agree upon. Well, that doesn't really mean anything if you're immediately going to export that to places where none of that matters so you can get your stuff cheap. All you do is wipe out your domestic capability and businesses and build up somebody else's infrastructure, which is essentially what we have unfortunately done. And now we are trying to reverse that. Or in theory, like if the government is oriented correctly, it is trying to reverse that.
Yeah.
So like our natural, we have the capability to be bigger than the Saudis in terms of our hydrocarbons, whether it's natural gas or oil or whatever it is. We do have that capability. It's just that we have I don't want to say this in an insulting way, because I don't think the environment is like an issue you should take lightly. I think it's a very important thing, and I also think the treatment of human beings is important. But you also have to rationalize, if you are going to be the kind of nation that actually stands up for those things, well, you can't have as much, right? Like
Yeah.
domestically, like you can't, you won't have the same wealth, because if people have to be paid, right? Like it's a difference of why, like some people regularly ask us now, like, why don't you make a BPRE FPS? A company actually got started to make a first-person shooter game. We don't make an FPS because the actual cost of not only making the game is astronomical at this point. The cost of supporting it, and how like the model of making games is so different today than it was 20 years ago. Like when I think about a video game, I think about a game where it's got a multiplayer mode. That's nice to have. I love multiplayer. But really what I'm looking for is a good campaign. I'm looking for a good story to lose myself in.
Yeah.
The cost of making something like that is astronomical at this point.
Oh yeah.
Right? Like, right. I don't know what CD Projekt Red invested in Cyberpunk.
Oh, a lot of money. They outright had to get government grants.
Yeah. And did they make that back? I have no idea. I mean, I'm assuming they did, but like, it's such a risk, and like you need, like, the people required to even manage projects at that scale is astronomical, right? Like I'm sure CD Projekt Red had to outsource a ton of stuff in addition to whatever their internal teams did. I mean, the new Armored Core game had a list of developers that were definitely not Japanese. Like I think there were Korean names, I saw Indian names, I saw a bunch of different like maybe I think there were some Vietnamese names in there. Even a game like Armored Core, which I think has a very elegantly like Armored Core always has, the story is not through a bunch of cutscenes and super high fidelity character animation, right? It's happening in like emails and messages and things you listen to. So it's not like there's not a ton of fidelity invested in this like storytelling aspect. Even that required a team of like, over 100 people.
Yeah.
Like, for us to make like a BPRE FPS, to make like something that was different and not just like, a copy of Call of Duty or Battlefield or something like that. Hey, that's a huge project. That's a massive project. In fact, I'm at the point now in my life where I'm like, I would be willing to consult on a project like that, but I would never even attempt to undertake it because I don't have the expertise to do something like that.
Yeah, it's not worth a heart attack,
Well, I mean, like Dave, I think Dave Jaffe is the designer of God of War, right?
Yeah.
He God of War is infamously like one of the greatest, or famously one of the greatest action games ever made. And before that game, Jaffe had mostly made arcade style games, like Twisted Metal was the one I think he was best known for. So the cost to him personally of making something as gigantic as God of War, he said he would never make a game like that again. Now, the franchise has clearly gone on and reached all kinds of different heights, right?
Yeah.
But like, I personally did not play the latest God of War game because, as we mentioned earlier, I don't have a PS5. I don't actually know how many people bought that game. I don't know like what Sony spent to make that game. I don't know if it was a compelling experience because, I mean, God of War was great. God of War 2 was greater. God of War 3 was the greatest, right? Like, and I mean, but ultimately they were all just building out what God of War did. It's sort of like what we were talking about with Blackwater. Like, why did Blackwater get all the contracts? They had the infrastructure. Their snowball was easier to roll, right? Like once they had the
set.
And once you have the framework for something like a game like God of War, well, you can build on that, and it becomes easier because you can think of like ideas of how to iterate versus invent. It's why I think like games like Call of Duty are so popular because they just keep iterating, right? And their moment to moment gameplay, for whatever it's worth, is fantastic. Like it's very engaging. Yeah. I mean, I don't play the game anymore because they famously stole a bunch of our art for the Modern Warfare reboot, and it was in the original demo they released. We had to send them a cease and desist, which was very upsetting at the time. But like, they pulled the artwork, and we never really got any credit for it because most people had no idea it was our work. Yeah, it's like for me to try to like make something that's going to challenge that machine seems like impossible. And quite frankly, it seems like it even seems like Call of Duty is not trying to challenge that machine anymore, right? Because like the games they're making now, where they seem to be making all their money, is that their battle royale game. I don't play it. I don't know what it's called.
Warzone.
Warzone. Thank you. Yeah, like I could see losing yourself in a game like that, and I'm like, like that doesn't really call to me, you know? Like I'm pretty interested in this new game Forever Winter. That looks really cool. But like honestly, Armored Core 6 was the first game I was actually genuinely excited about.
Yeah.
Since Battlefield 2042, and I got really paid back for my interest in Battlefield 2042.
Yeah.
I mean, that was pretty brutal. And the sad part is I actually played it continuously while it was broken because I just wanted to play a Modern Warfare game, and it was the best game in town because I didn't want to play Call of Duty.
Yeah, you were just waiting for that magical moment of like, oh, just the next update will fix it. The next update will fix it.
I mean, you're not wrong, and I mean, the game is in a very. There's so much stuff they've done to improve it over the years. I mean, it is a much better game now than it was when it launched. But it's also like, and again, I think it's an expectations thing. Like they don't add I don't personally care that they don't add a ton of guns, because every time you do that, there's always just one uber gun that everybody ends up using, right? Like there's always a meta, right? Like that's the thing that keeps me away from bigger 40K is that good players are studying the meta. They're not getting good at the game. They're studying the meta of the game. Like what are the units that will win consistently, not what takes the most skill, or how do you get good with the units you have?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, they very famously did
problem.
that. Yeah, well, it's because they're trying to sell toys because they're trying to keep the lights on. You know, like they need you to keep buying models. Like your brother, the Imperial Guard guy. Like, I mean, he's out there. You know, he's shoveling cash into that furnace.
That is true. Like as much as he complains about it, he's still doing it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and if he gets enjoyment from it, great. But like I don't. I've tried to play 40K a few times. It doesn't appeal to me because it's so blatantly broken.
Oh yeah.
And I never feel like whenever I play the game, I never feel like I'm beating my opponent. I never like I said this at Connections a couple weeks ago at that wargaming thing I was telling you about. I said crunchiness should be in the player interactions, not in the mechanics that allow the players to interact. All of the best games are designed so that like it equips the players to create problems for the other players, to create dilemmas for the opponent, right? This is from the Army Infantry Manual. Problems can be solved. Dilemmas are a series of problems. And when you stack enough problems into a dilemma, you leave your opponent with no good choices. And, you know, most computer strategy, it's funny, I used to have such strong memories of Nectaris being the hardest computer game ever, like strategy game. And I actually have a Core Duo 2 PC Engine. And I bought the game again recently to give it a shot. And I was like, God, this game is so easy. It really does. All it deals with is like, okay, basically create an L on the opponent and have the high ground, and you'll win every battle. Yeah. And it's every battle is concentrate your fire on the opponent and destroy them and move to the next one. Like, okay, that's not a really good strategy game, right? Like, and even Front Mission, which I used to have like this like super boner for Front Mission. I loved the fact that it was like a hard sci-fi military RPG. And let me tell you, Left Alive was a stake in my heart that I've never recovered from. I don't even know if you're familiar with that game, but that was actually one of the original designers of Armored Core went to Squaresoft to make a Front Mission game, and it was so bad.
Oh,
I bought, and I was so excited by it because it had Yoji Shinkawa artwork, the guy from the Kojima team.
Yeah,
I bought the special edition in America and the special edition in Japan because they came with different art books and models, and I was super excited about the game. And I was like, "This is going to be great." Armored Core returns. Game is completely unplayable. It's a total piece of shit.
Yeah.
And I have these two special editions that just like I like have them buried in my pile of shame of like collector's editions of things that I should have never bought.
At least you got the art books.
Yeah, I mean, and the soundtrack's not bad either. I mean, like there's a lot of good ideas in those games and in that game, but they just clearly were not done. They were not ready to launch.
Yeah,
and
it needed a few more years.
Yeah, I mean, like I understand that they patched a lot of stuff and made it playable, but by that time my PS4 had died, and I was like, well,
Yeah, it's like all
I'm
you
not
remember
slogging
is
through that shit again.
the first impression. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, and well, yeah, I mean, my first impression was a screenshots, and I was so excited about a game like that because I wanted a game. I thought it was cool to have a game where you could be outside the mech and inside the mech and
Yeah.
experience the fighting from both perspectives. I thought that would be really interesting, and they did absolutely nothing with it.
Yeah.
Um, and again, I'm assuming it's purely a resources thing because that would be a very expensive game to make.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like being able to flesh both paths out in a way to where both are satisfying. I mean, that's something to where that's like a studio baby thing. That's not like a small little thing they tinker with. It'd be something like they're all hands on deck. Like the A team has got to do this. We have got to blow people away come like E3. You know?
Yeah, I think you're correct. I think
Yeah.
I mean, and things like E3 or Tokyo Game Show, like, are those even a thing anymore? Like I don't know, man.
Yeah, I know E3's dead. They replaced that with I think it's called like Summer Game Fest now. But Tokyo Game Show is still going, and it's one of those where I haven't really seen anyone actively watch them anymore. It's more of people who would like tweet at me or message me and go like, "Oh yeah, here's the trailer that just came out." Like everyone's just waiting for the trailer. They're waiting for the trailer for the thing they're interested in, and the rest of the show, who cares?
Yeah, man.
Okay.
It's such a wild time, dude. Like video games are so not what they used to be, and like my love for video games is so deeply I don't know if I don't want to say like diminished, but like I mean I used to go to Tokyo Game Show. That was a thing I used to go to. I used to go to the Winter TGS every year. I have all kinds of weird things that I bought at TGS, like Radiant Silvergun. I had like the actual developer books for those, the art books signed by the guys from Treasure. I had like Gun Griffin. I have like a flight jacket that I won at like playing the Gun Griffin 2 at their booth, and I bought like I have a Zippo lighter. I mean, like Gun Griffin was a game I was super passionate about. I loved Gun Griffin and Gun Griffin 2. I thought they were amazing games. Again, a lot of mech stuff in my past. Like I really
Yeah.
like, and that's because those were the best war games for years. It was like, Japanese when they expressed I'm interested in war stories. Japanese expressed a concept of war best through like mechs, right?
Yeah, like
So,
Gundam and things like that. Votoms.
yeah, Votom's another incredible series. Hilariously, one of the guys attached to work on the BPR anime was the original director of Votom's.
Oh, yeah, that's pretty dope.
Yeah, it would have been great, man. It would-
Yeah. He would
what
sneak
could
in
have been?
Chirico somewhere.
Yeah. Oh God, Kiriko QV. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have too many scope dogs.